Well, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 64 of the Yorkshire Gamers, a Reet Big War Games podcast. And my guest today is Andy Johnson. Andy is a gamer, he's a former soldier, member of the Coldstream Guards, and he is also an author with a number of historical novels that we're going to talk about as our big topic at the end of the show today. And linked with the show start, it is the band of the Coldstream Guards who play on Ilkley Bartat at the start of the show, or on Ilkley without one's hat, as they say in Harrogate. So today is or a return to the usual format, if you like. We've had a run of shows from Summer Brews, slightly shorter Little Wars TV, the visit to Trevor Dixon, and then the catch-up episode with Paul Thompson. So we've not had in inverted commas, normal episode for a while. So this is our Wargamers show, the four sections that you all know and love. So it should be quite an easy one to listen to. If you haven't listened to them already, the last couple of shows with Trevor Dixon, visited his workshop in Honley, not far away. And then the last one with Paul Thompson was a little hour and a half catch up on all things early war miniatures and also the German raid on the Isle of Wight in World War II, or Paul's investigation into the possibility of such an event. And that's a fantastic listen. So sit back and get ready to enjoy a cracking chat. Really enjoyed this one with Andy. Lots of really great stories, and he was kind enough to talk with us for an extended period of time about his military career as well, and how someone who's been at the sharp end of combat feels about wargaming and wargaming conflicts that they've been involved in. So get this in a cup of tea, some posh biscuits, some Garibaldis, and without further ado, here's the interview.
Well, hello once again to the interview section of the Yorkshire Gamers a Reet Big War Games podcast. And today we are on episode 64. Today's guest has many hats to wear, including a big furry one. He had a long and distinguished career in the British Army and has become a successful historical author, has his own battlefield guide YouTube channel, and has also been known to do a bit of wargaming as well. Born in the capital of God's own county, York, he made the difficult decision at the age of 16 to leave the home of pies, puddings and mushy peas and join the British Army. For the next quarter of a century, he travelled the world in the service of the Crown, including a number of periods of active service before a stint as an instructor at Sandhurst, before ending his career service in the Guards. His military service and love of history is translated into a great series of historical novels, which are well worth a read. And I know because I got drawn into one of the books about the German invasion of the UK called Seelau Nord whilst on holiday recently. And I genuinely, and I'm not just saying this because he's on the show, I generally found it hard to put down, which is really good. So let's give a big warm Yorkshire welcome to my guest today, Andy Johnson. How are you, Andy?
Hi, Ken. Thanks for having me on the show. I feel a little bit intimidated following in the footsteps of the War Games glitterati. It's a real privilege to be here.
Oh, great! That's fantastic. We've had a few chats over the years, haven't we? At Partisan and the show there, you have your little stand that we'll talk a little bit about later on with your books. And I did try to come and interview to get you on the show about over a year ago, and you'd been collared by somebody who just seemed to talk to you all afternoon, and I couldn't get anywhere near you. I think you remember that day, don't you?
Yeah.
So, whoever that was, you stopped Andy coming on the show for about a year, but we got here eventually, didn't we, mate?
Yeah, they had important feedback from me on my novels, and it's important to listen to the punters, so, you know.
It is. It's always, I have important people who give me feedback on the show, and I just ignore them. Can't be that important, can it? Right, so, what we're going to do is, have you ever done anything like this before, Andy? Have you ever done podcasts or anything?
A little bit. I've been interviewed on the radio a couple of times in the military.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah. So I'll blunder my way through it. Just give me stage directions as necessary.
Excellent. Well, the first thing we do is a little bit of a thing that we call the 4-minute challenge. And that's just for you to really kind of give us a background of your history in wargaming, really, in 4 minutes. Or under. You don't have to do 4 minutes. So just give it's a nice little icebreaker and a way to get the podcast going. So whenever you're ready, mate, I've got my little timer there that I'll hold up to the
professional. We really are on the clock.
We are on the clock. So whenever you're ready, mate, off you go.
Okay, so I suppose I've been playing with toy soldiers since the age of 3. I was really into cowboy and Indian films when I was a little boy, and I'd watched, I think it was Custer's Last Stand, and I wouldn't stop talking about it. So my dad went out and bought me a packet of the little, 1/76 scale Airfix figures, dark blue plastic US Cavalry, and I've still got this really clear image in my mind of my dad sat there in our old house with a little tin of yellow enamel paint, painting the neckerchiefs on them, and I've still got those figures now upstairs in the attic in a box.
Wow!
And it started from there, and through my childhood, every time I got pocket money, I'd go to the local model shop and buy another box of Airfix figures. And I think I've probably got, the entire catalogues with of Airfix figures. And then we went on to the 132nd, the big soldiers, as we called them. And I played with those and my cousins and my friends all the way through childhood. Our war games rules involved rolling marbles at each other and knocking them over, which is as sophisticated as we got. And then I got to the age of 16 and off I went to join the army and be a real soldier. And kind of left that box in the attic at home, and that was it. And until about the age of 21, 22, and I was in an observation post in Northern Ireland, pretty much bored stiff between stints of being sat in the tower and observing. So I'd written to my mum and said, "Can you send me some stuff to read?" And duly about a week later, I got a couple of novels, a couple of books through the post, and a copy of War Games Illustrated, which I think was literally pretty new in those days. It was, sort of part of the press. I remember sitting there looking at all these amazing colour photographs of proper War Games figures and terrain and thinking how amazing it looked. And of course, all the advertisements are in there for the manufacturers. And I didn't realise that this kind of wargaming setup existed. I thought it was Airfix or nothing. And so I said, right, well, when I come back from Ireland, I'm going to get into this. This sounds like my bag. And by sheer coincidence, after the tour, I was walking around my home city of York with a pile of money in the bank because I'd spent nothing, having been in Ireland for 6 months.
Yeah.
And I randomly came across this tiny little shop called The Little Soldier. And it sold War Games figures in boxes and blister packs and stuff. But in the window were these 2 gorgeous regiments of English Civil War greencoat foot with all the pipe blocks and everything. And I thought, God, I've just got to have them because ECW has always been my great historical interest anyway. And I went straight in and put the money down and took them. And they sort of sat on my bedside table for a few months, and I would stare at them lovingly. And in the end, I thought, I need some more of this. And that was it. I just started buying more figures, painting my own. And the rest is history, as they say. And there were two more seminal events which sort of propelled me onwards. One is, later in my army career in Germany, some friends were into wargaming as well. It was 50mm, sadly, Napoleonics, but I got involved, and that sort of really got me into the rules side of it because they were big on the rules. And then I had my own son, and my son has sort of grown up with a love of wargaming as well, and he's now the driving force every time he comes on leave because he's in the army as well. He started a new period. And I always know he's on the way home because a big box of figures come through the post, and 2 days later he appeared. And yeah, he's really pushing me on now. Thankfully, he's got better eyesight than me, so he leads on the paint. And that's it. That's pretty much how it all started.
Brilliant. 20 seconds left. Spot on.
Phew.
Spot on. Bit of timing going on there. Perfect.
Yeah.
So you were born and brought up in York then.
Yeah.
Whereabouts in the city did you live?
Literally right next to the racecourse, just across the road from it, in a place called Dringhouses. And of course, York is a great place to live if you're into history because there's just bucketfuls of it. And I mean, it's surrounded by battlefields. You know, there's half a dozen within just a few miles of my mum's house. So, you know, we've got Fulford literally a mile away, Stamford Bridge up the road, Taunton, Marston Moor, Borough Bridge is just up the road. You know, absolutely surrounded by battlefields in that part of the world. So it's a historian's dream as a city to be brought up in.
Did that love of history come from your family, from school, from friends? Where do you think the spark for it came?
If I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure, Ken. As long as I can remember, and the earliest I can remember is the age of 3, because I know it was in our old house and we moved when I was 4. Since the age of 3, I was always obsessed with military stuff. I would watch all the war films. I can still remember watching the original Dunkirk film, you know, the 1959 version, in the old house on a black and white TV, and I can remember that quite clearly. And I was just always fascinated with the military. And if you ask anybody, my school teachers, members of the family, they'll all say, you know, from the age of 3, we all said, he's going to join the army, he's going to be a soldier. And so I just grew up with this love of all things military, which is a bit weird because I'm not really into dressing up in uniforms. I don't really like big crowds of people. I'm not a big traveller. I'm not that sporty. And I wouldn't say I have a predilection for killing people. But you know, it was something that I always wanted to do. And I think it's because I had this, I don't know where it came from, just a really strong sense of duty and purpose growing up. And of course, the interest in being a soldier led me into the interest in military history because I just want to know more about it. And actually, when I analyse it a little bit more deeply, I grew up in an age when I was surrounded by ex-soldiers. So like every male member of my family had been in the military. I mean, my dad did national service in the 50s, but grandparents, great uncles had all been in the war. You know, I had a great uncle who'd been in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, another one who'd served on HMS York when it got sunk off Crete. My granddad was an armourer, ground crew in the Battle of Britain down in 11 Group. And my postman, and this is probably the reason why I joined the Coldstream Guards, I always remember my postman was a fearsome looking gentleman. In those days, they wore the old GPO uniform, and he had a peak cap with the peak absolutely slashed vertically down over his nose. And he would sit so straight on his bike and cycle around, and I was terrified of this guy. But there was something about him that I just thought, guy, who is this guy? And my dad sort of said, oh, that's Mr. whoever he was. I forget the name now. And said, he used to be in the Guards, you know. And when my dad said that, he always used to have this sense of awe in his voice. And he says, oh, well, he was in the Guards. He was a Coldstream Guardsman. That's why he's like that. That kind of always stuck with me. And so years later, when I decided to join the army, I could have gone to the local regiment, which was the Prince of Wales' own regiment of Yorkshire. But I just had the image of this postman in my brain. I thought, I want to be a big, tall, hard-looking bloke like him. And so it was the Guards for me. And there's an amusing story there about the recruiting officer. We've got time later on. But that's where it all came from, I think.
Oh, brilliant! It seems to be. I mean, you know, I'm in my mid to late 50s now, and my parents were probably the same, similar to yours. And they were too young to serve in the war, but were, you know, around the time of national service. And my grandparents were in the war, and a lot of great uncles and what have were in the war. So you were always around that. Not, you know, they weren't chatting about it at the dinner table, but you were always around. And I remember an uncle of mine, Uncle John, when I was getting interested into it, and he sat me down and we spoke about Hougoumont in quite a lot of detail. And it was just fascinating to me at the time. Absolutely fascinating. And I think, I don't know, you know, that's where our generation got our spark for history, I think, from first accounts. So lovely to hear that was the case. You mentioned in your 4 minutes a little shop in York.
Yeah.
If I remember rightly, it was on Gillygate, was it?
Yeah, that's it. Gillygate. Yeah.
Gillygate.
Yeah.
Was it the Little Soldier?
A Little Soldier. Yeah.
Little Soldier. It was tiny, wasn't it? It really was a small shop.
Yeah.
Because normally, when you're young, you think everything's massive, don't you? Because you're quite small. You go into the shop and then you go back in your 50s and you think, bloody hell, this is small.
Yeah.
Well, that shop really was tiny. And that did you kind of get most of your sort of early gaming stuff from there?
Yeah, because this was the days before the internet. So I don't know if younger listeners know anything about that age, but if you wanted anything, you had to go in the yellow pages and hope that there was a shop in your area that sold what you wanted, or know where that shop was. You couldn't just go on the internet and find it like you can now. And so I had no idea that this whole wargaming setup existed with proper lead figures and all the rest of it. And for me, it was just an accidental find. I didn't even know the shop was there, because it's on a road that I would not normally walk down in York. It's not in the main town centre. And I was bored, I was on leave now. I was just wandering around aimlessly and came across it. And so that became my go-to. Every time I was on leave, I would go there and get what I wanted. But again, by talking to the chap who ran it, whose name I can't remember sadly, you get to learn about the wider network. He was clearly networked in with the war game shows and things like that. And so I started to explore further afield and started going to my first war game shows. And of course, War Games Illustrated was out then. So you kind of had that monthly magazine that was giving you all the links into the network. But yeah, that shop, I think, really opened up the scene for me.
Yeah, it was a lovely little place. And like you, I can't remember the name of the chap who was in there, but I can't remember. Was it in early 2000s it closed, or late 90s? I can't remember.
It would have been, yeah.
Yeah, I remember going and it being there, and then the next time I went, maybe 4 or 5 years later, it wasn't there. So I kind of missed it. I missed the reasons for it closing. And it's a real shame, because those stores kind of, they weren't corporate in any way. They're not like today where you've got Warhammer literally banging you on the back of the head. It was more free and open with periods and different manufacturers, etc. So, did you ever get involved in a club scene? I appreciate with you being in the army, it would have been a little bit difficult with moving around and stuff.
Not really. I did think about it. I heard that there was a war games club in York, but they tended to move around a lot in terms of venue. So tracking them down was quite difficult, and coming on leave intermittently didn't sort of really lend itself to getting sort of established with that. So it was really early when I moved to the battalion in Germany. There were a load of guys there who were into Napoleonics 15mm, and at this point I was a 28mm English Civil War man. But I, they were wargaming, so I got involved, and I initially started sort of playing with their armies, joining in, and then we decided we were going to do a massive version of the Battle of Leipzig, because in Germany the attics were huge, big old German attics, and we had a whole attic to ourselves. So we just set the whole floor up as the table, and we were literally walking around the battlefield.
Brilliant.
And we all decided we were going to have a section of the battle to fight each. Most of them had the figures already, but I ordered a big pile of French. And this is where the Osprey books are really good, because we got the Osprey book and it has the orders of battle in, doesn't it? And we all sort of like highlighted a section of the order of battle and said, right, that's yours. And as I bought these and I was painting them, I had my little yellow highlighter and I was ticking them off. And until I had, I think it was Lauriston's Corps that I did. Again, I still got them somewhere in the box. And we war game Leipzig over and over again for months. And that was it, really. That's the nearest I ever got to a club. So my whole war gaming life, if you like, has been solo war gaming or with my son.
Yeah. And you've not picked up a club or anything, or a local gaming friend since you've been out of the army?
No, not really. I think mainly because I've been so ridiculously busy. And my job up until recently involved me commuting to and from London nearly every day. So they're ridiculously long days, and come weekends, personal admin to square away and family stuff. So by then my son was getting into it. So I've been wargaming with my son really for the last 10 years. I mean, I'm hoping that as time goes by, I'll become more time rich. And now that I know more people in the community, it would be nice to get involved with some groups, when I see, is it the Lardy group, that they often have some great weeks away by the look of it.
Yeah, they do.
I'd love to do something like that. I just need to make the time and get out in there and do it, really. And dare I say it, there's a bit of imposter syndrome as well, because a lot of people have come up through wargaming through clubs, so that they're really well established in the community, and they seem to know the right way to do everything. I put the right way in inverted commas.
Yeah.
And I'm always slightly wary about going in and looking like a complete and utter fool, by not really knowing what's going on. So I'll ease myself in gently, I think.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for 45 years. And I don't know what's going on. So I think you'll find, certainly from my experience, that a lot of clubs and there's a lot less of that off, putting people off and we're doing this and you must do it this way. It's a lot more friendly. Well, it might just be the circles I move in, but it's a lot more friendly now, and a lot more, coming in and join in and try this and that sort of thing. So I'd certainly hope you would be able to find something. And the Lardy Days is a great place to start, because you get to try a couple of sets of rules during the day. All the people who are there are friendly. They're really into the Lardy rules, but they're also into the period, and they're into getting people in and enjoying the games. I've had a couple of friends who've done them recently as a first-time experience, and I don't know anyone. What's it going to be like? And the best mates with everyone at the end of the day. So it's a really, really good experience. Do you have a setup at home at all?
Kind of, yeah. So we've got an integral garage in the house, which isn't used as a garage, as very few garages in the country are.
Yeah.
So it sort of doubles up as a library / war games room / whatever other junk my wife wants to throw in there. But we do have a kind of improvised table, which at the minute is covered in houses and armies in the process of being painted. But we clear that whenever my son comes home and set it up, and off we go and game in there.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. So you mentioned English Civil War was one of your big favourites as a period. Do you remember what the kind of, was it those 2 units that you bought initially from the Little Soldier that really got you going on the ECW?
Well, I'd always loved it as a period of history. We did it at primary school, but back in the days when English history was actually taught in school in some kind of structured way. At primary school, we went through early modern history, Spanish Armada, English Civil War, the whole lot. And I was fascinated by the English Civil War in particular, especially when I realised that, one of the major battles had happened literally next door to where I lived. And then when I saw those units, they just looked beautiful. The way they've been painted, I've never seen anything like it in my life before. I've never seen a professional war games unit based up and painted like that. And that just sort of, it just kindled in my mind the image of the English Civil War, the whole sense of the period. And I just thought, I want to do this. I want to get the big armies and do a big battle. And so I think the first unit I painted myself was the King's Life Guard of Foot. And that was a bit random. I was actually, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes, you are. I always swear on it. I wouldn't.
I was on the piss in Nottingham with a friend. We were both on leave. I was in Nottingham and we had a massive weekend session. And I think it was the Monday morning. He was going to head off back down south, and I was going to go home to York. And I think I had the magazine with me, War Games magazine, and I suddenly realised that War Games Foundry was in Nottingham, or it certainly used to be.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'll pop in, because I assumed it was a shop. And so we drove down there, and it was this little industrial building on the back of an industrial estate. And I kind of knocked on the door and walked in, and had all their machinery there and stuff, and you could smell the hot lead. And I just said, I've come to buy some War Games figures. And the guy just looked at me like I had a chicken on my head. It's like, really? Because it was just a production facility, not a shop. And he said, well, have a look through them boxes over there. And there were all these boxes where they were casting figures and splitting them up.
Yeah.
And he said, that's the English Civil War row there. And I was going down the production line, literally picking them out, still warm, having come out of the...
Oh, brilliant.
And I got like 30 odd figures to make a regiment. paid for him in cash there, and then I walked out, and he just sort of stood there with the cash in his hand, looking a bit stunned. And that was the first War Games unit I ever bought. And off I went and painted them, and they actually looked all right. And even now they stood up reasonably well against some of the better figures I've painted and the ones I bought ready painted. And I'm very proud of them because my first ever homegrown proper War Games unit.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I love a War Games unit with a story behind it like that. That's superb. That is. You can't, because you can buy stuff. You buy stuff pre-painted and stuff, but it will never have that story.
No, exactly.
You literally picking them out of the molds at a War Games foundry.
It was the look on the poor guy's face. I mean, I was terribly naive at the time, and I think maybe that's why I worry about suddenly dropping my big size 10 feet in a War Games group, because I wonder if people might look at me a bit like he looked at me and say, "Who is this bloke?"
They probably would, but they'd enjoy it, mate. I certainly would. That's a great story. I like that. And I'm guessing from your military service, you will be on the correct royalist side when it comes to Parliament.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm definitely on the side of His Majesty, good King Charles. God bless him.
He's my current boss as well, so I have to make sure I keep the boss happy by serving King rather than Parliament. And I have to say that no matter what you say about democracy, it's been a bit shit recently.
It's overrated. Give me benign dictators any day of the week.
Exactly. My granddad, I've told this before on the podcast, but my granddad said to me when I was a young lad, probably, when I'm forming my opinions, he said, "You know what, son, if you have a bad monarch, he will die, and you might get a good monarch." And I thought, I get that, granddad. Yeah. That's really good. And he says, if you have a politician and they die, you get another bloody politician.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you never have that chance of having the good monarch that you do in Parliament.
I've always worked on the principle that people that feel they need to compete and get themselves elected to leadership positions probably want it a bit too badly. Yeah. But, accident of birth, it's kind of I better do my duty. So that's the way I view it.
There's a system of Parliament, I can't remember what it's called now, where people just get randomly chosen to govern, so they don't have a choice. Yeah. So there's no line in the pockets to get yourself right. You're in charge of that. That's a much better system. Anyway, we've solved the world's problems.
Yeah, that's it. Politics.
So what are your kind of go-to periods apart from the ECW now? What are you playing?
So I've got into the Second World War. I sheered away from it for many years because I thought it would probably be quite complicated. I mean, when you talk about like horse and musket, it's everyone's got a musket or they've got a pipe. So it's pretty simple in terms of working out who's doing what to who. But, the minute you go to the Second World War, you've got all these different weapon systems with different ranges and rates of fire and goodness knows what else. So that kind of scared me off for a while. But my son was really into World War II. That's how he sort of got into history. And he kind of drove us into that period. And I was very fortunate that the first rule set that we tried properly was Chain of Command. And although, clearly it's got to have its complexities because of the nature of weaponry and all that kind of thing, I actually find them a really, really great set of rules because despite the necessary complexity, they've been well thought through and they're easy to follow. And more than anything else, they also make sense. And I suppose as an ex-soldier, what I'm looking for is for the war game to make sense to me when I'm playing it. And I find that the outcomes, although a lot of it's done on the roll of the dice and it's pretty random, it feels very real when you're playing it. The tactical mechanisms feel very real and as if it could be a real scenario. So I think that works very well. And I have tried a couple of other World War II rule sets. I won't name them because I don't like bad-mouthing anybody's creative work. I've tried a couple of other sets, but they didn't really work for me. I found them a bit clunky and a bit difficult to follow. But Chain of Command, I've really found works for us. So mainly because of my son, we've done a lot of World War II. And he's quite into the late war stuff. I quite like the early war. we're both now getting a bit of an interest in the North African campaign. So the great thing is there's so much variety in the Second World War. Within one period, you can float all over the place and do so many different things. So there's that. He's also got to Napoleonics. I envy him, really. I envy him the newness of experience that he's going through at the minute, because he's exploring history and finding new periods, and it's also new to him. You can see that the sort of sense of wonder when he's reading about it. So, like, he's recently discovered the medieval period as if it had never existed before, and so he's like really getting into that at the minute, and it's great because I get to sort of have that experience with him again. Now, I remember going through it myself years ago, and now I'm sort of rediscovering it all with him and seeing the wonder in his eyes. And but he is a man who puts his money where his mind is, and when he discovers something new, it's right. I'm going to go out and buy some figures, and we're going to paint them. So the number of periods we've got now are they're expanding ever rapidly. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I had that joy again recently with the Garibaldi stuff that I did, of finding a new period that I knew a little bit about, but really didn't know the ins and outs, and to go away and research it. I've kind of had that feeling quite late in life about that with the Garibaldi stuff, and really, really enjoyed that process. And that's, I guess, that's one of the main reasons I do this hobby, is that love of history. So interesting. Then we're going to talk about your military career in the next part of the show. But I was interested to hear you say there about chain of command. It's more decision based, isn't it, than tech based? So did you find that, having experience in the military, of it being a realistic process in the rules, your thought processes are similar to what you would have done in an exercise without troops, or even leading men in real life? Yeah,
it forces you to think. That's what I like about chain of command. And actually, dare I say it, I wish chain of command had have existed 15, 20 years ago, when I was kind of company sergeant major, regimental sergeant major, and was trying to develop young non-commissioned officers, because I ended up using wargaming as a training tool. I think I remember Gareth Lane saying he'd done this when he was in the military, using figures to help illustrate minor tactics and operations. We did do that on a couple of occasions, but at the time we were kind of just inventing the rules and making up our own mechanisms. And actually, chain of command, I think, it would be a really, really useful set of rules with which to train young commanders, because it forces them to go through that same kind of decision-making process. Think about the weapon systems, where you position them, and the other thing that I like about it as well is it does require commands to be given. I often think people who've got no experience of the military imagine that the battlefield is just this massive free-for-all, what we often call weapons free, where everyone they just go on there and do their own thing, and there's bullets going everywhere. And I mean, battlefields are chaotic, but there's a certain kind of organised chaos to it, and that's what the command structure's for. And I think chain of command just replicates it really well, probably as well as you're ever going to get in any war games set of rules.
That's really interesting to hear that. It's certainly, I mean, it's kind of below the scale that I normally play my games at, so I'm kind of missing out on that. But a lot of people that I talk to do say that it replicates that kind of junior leader, junior commander decision level that you're making.
And I have to say, I'm not really into skirmish games. I know a lot of people are. I'm a big battle man. I like to see the troops on the table. But actually, a couple of platoons is a pretty big action in modern warfare. That is quite sizable, and so it still feels like you're getting plenty of action, but you're also getting into the detail as well. It's not just about moving big blocks on a table. You're getting into the realities of what it's like to engage in combat. And the restrictions of certain weapons or movement or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's very good. So, Richard Clark from Two Fat Ladders, if you're listening, that'll be 25 quid to me and Andy each, please. Thank you. Pay up at Partisan. So, no, I'm quite happy to not give free advertising, but talk, positively about stuff like this, because, if you from your perspective, some of the roles that I've had involve leadership as well, and I think it's a really good system. So we'll finish off this first section, as we always do, with a good old Venn diagram of wargamers. So I break our hobby down into wargamer, painter, collector, and historian. I think I've got a pretty good steer on at least one of them. But how do you see yourself fitted into that Venn diagram? Which are the most important aspects of the hobby for you?
I would say I'm pretty much an even balance of all four of those now. In my early days, there was no doubt I was very much collector and painter, because there were years where I was just painting and lining them all up on a tabletop and staring at them, and that's as far as I got. But having said that, I've always read the history behind it. I could eat up military history any day of the week, and the gaming is something which has eventually come along, which I enjoy very much. And I think I'm now at the stage where I've got a nice even balance of all four. I like reading the history, but I don't get overexcited about it. I know some war gamers, the war game could be exactly how it was, on the day, and they get really protected about their period. I'm not that serious about it, but I'm interested in the history, clearly. I think the painting and the collecting I'll always enjoy, because I find it very therapeutic, because I have such a busy life. It's a nice way to zone out, sit down there and paint away, and it's always nice to see something you've created yourself come to life. That's one of the great pleasures. But the gaming as well, especially, if it's a period that I'm really interested in, and I for me, it's about being able to feel the period while you're playing it. If you're playing the game and you're thinking, this feels realistic, or, I can picture this battle happening on the ground, that gives me a deep sense of satisfaction, I think. So yeah, I'd say I'm about 25% of each.
Excellent. Do you do social media at all? I think I've seen you're on Twitter, aren't you?
I'm a social media menace. Yeah. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. That's the other one. Yeah. So I'm sort of on there, and like most things that I do in life, I blunder through it. My big size 10 feet and try not to make a mess.
Yeah.
Don't always succeed.
Do you find it mostly a positive experience? I certainly do. I know some people kind of say, I've trolls and all this sort of stuff, but I just tend to block all that out.
I do. I find it very positive. I mean, certainly from a wargaming perspective, I've learned so much more about the hobby in the last 10 years by being on Twitter, in particular, but also Facebook and YouTube as well. I mean, YouTube's brilliant for understanding rules. If I'm stuck with rules, there's some great videos on there, and painting as well. My painting's really improved, eyesight allowing, over the last 10 years because of YouTube. I think the secret with Twitter particularly is you just got to not get dragged into it. It is quite difficult, particularly if you've had one of those days and you see something that irks you and you just want to pound the keyboard, but you just got to take a deep breath and step back. So that's not what I'm here for. And in all my time on social media, I've only experienced trolling once, and when I first brought out the very first book, and it was very clear from the messages that the person doing it was someone who wanted to write their own book, and it wasn't going very well for them. And
right.
Their means of letting the frustration out was to attack me and mine.
No.
And it does hurt, and anything that you do that's creative, when someone criticizes it, wounds you deeply, which is why I never write a bad book review. If I don't enjoy a book, I just don't write about it, because just because I didn't enjoy something doesn't mean somebody else won't. We all got very different tastes. So I certainly don't do that to other people, because I know how much work goes into what people do. But I've been very lucky that there are so many really, really kind people who said so many nice things about books and stuff. And so that kind of really overcompensates for it. And so that one guy, I just blocked, ignored, forgot about him, and he just went away. And I don't get dragged into arguments, so I try not to. Occasionally, there's a bit of piss taking goes on in the wargame community, which I really enjoy. And I'm more than happy to, wind someone up over whether tanks should be based or not. That doesn't bother me.
No, that's quite a good one. Though. As soon as you mention that, it just goes.
Yeah,
It just goes. Basing tanks is the most. If basing tanks is the most controversial thing in our hobby, I could live with that.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, you compare that conversely with the Games Workshop community, and that can be really poisonous. The fandom, if you like, that the people that are into the Games Workshop world, that they've literally taken ownership of it to the point where the people who create the whole world and the system find themselves being told what to do by the fans. You can't do that. You can't introduce that. And that's a bit dark. That's a bit weird. It's just a game, guys. Come on, chill out. So yeah, I think our part of the hobby, we're lucky that generally most people play the game, in the spirit of the game. So
exactly, and that's why we call it weird shit. The other stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just what?
Yeah, it's a bit odd.
Well, thanks very much for that, Andy. That was a great introduction there. So we're going to take a quick break for the audience, and we'll be back in a second for part 2. Well, that was a lovely introduction from Andy. We got to know quite a bit about his past and involved in wargaming. And we're going to kind of use the second part of the show to talk about Andy's military career. But before we do that, it is normally the big game section, Andy, and you did mention that you do like a big game. So what's the joy of the big game for you?
I think for me, it's partly the aesthetic of being able to see it all laid out. But I think it's also because, and again, this is maybe because of my own career in the military, I've always been obsessed with trying to understand the mechanics of battles and conflicts and trying to picture it in my mind and how it all fits together and how it all works. Because I remember, when I was very young, reading about history and not quite understanding everything I was reading. And so I've always been trying to picture what a battle would look like and how it all actually is organised and managed. And I say I did it when I was younger. I still do it now. I'll wander around and I'll see a random piece of countryside with hills and fields, streams. And in my mind's eye, I'm superimposing troops on that landscape and trying to imagine, for instance, how much room a British Napoleonic line battalion would take up in 2 ranks and, try and imagine how big that battlefield must be to fit on 76,000 men or whatever it is, and trying to imagine how manoeuvres are executed. And I think it's that desire to understand the mechanics of battle that has moved me away from skirmish games and wanting to see big games, because in my mind's eye, I kind of want to be that bird hovering above the battlefield, looking down and seeing all the moving parts. And I think that's what it is. I can't think of any other way to describe it. I want to see the whole piece, not just a tiny zoomed in bit of it. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, excellent. It always looks good. It always looks good with lots of troops on the table, I think.
One of the things that's just come to mind is in one of those early editions of War Games Illustrated that I was given. I always remember there was a massive Franco-Prussian war game.
Yes.
And it was done in 10mm, if I remember rightly, which is probably way too small for my eyes. But because it was done in such small scale and the table was so big, I think like 12 by 8, you could see entire corps on the field. And it wasn't about individual units. It was seeing the maneuver of all these massive formations. And I actually saw that game live at a war game show not long after it had been in the magazine. And that really brought it to life for me. I thought, God, that's the kind of thing I really want to see, these big mass formations on the tabletop, preferably with bigger figures. But of course, that has a scale issue, doesn't it, in terms of table size? And I think that is another thing that sort of pushed me towards the big battle.
Yeah. It's as everyone knows who listens to this show, it's what I'm trying to bring back and trying to revive, because I just think it looks absolutely amazing. It's a lot of work. It takes you a lot of time, but when you get there, Man, it looks good.
Yeah.
It looks good.
It's what's pushed my son towards Napoleonics, because he's into cavalry, and he says every time, "Oh, we just need to get more cavalry on the table, more horses," So
Oh, brilliant! Absolutely brilliant. So I'm going kind of hijacking this section, Andy, to talk about your military career, if you're okay with that. Because I don't think we've had. We've had. George Nafziger was in the U.S. Marines in Vietnam, but we didn't really talk much about his military service. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of questions that come up sometimes with military veterans and wargaming. So I thought if you're happy to talk about it, I thought that would be a nice thing to do to cover on the podcast, something we haven't done before. So you mentioned in the first section that early period of life when you were into your military stuff, and everyone was saying, "Andy's going to be a soldier. He's going to be a soldier." Was it always in your mind you were always going to knock on the door at Fulford or wherever you went and say, "I'd like to be a soldier, please, mister"?
Yeah. There was no other plan in my life. My mum will tell you now, if you ask her, she had no idea what I would have done if I joined the military. I remember doing work experience from school when I was 15. You got a list of local businesses you go work in, and I read through it. There was nothing there that interested me, and the nearest thing I could find was something working for the local newspaper, because I thought, maybe I could be a journalist, because I've always enjoyed writing and that kind of thing. And anyway, they put me in the print room, where they cast in the old days when it was casting lead typeface and all the rest of it, and I'm not technically minded. I wasn't remotely interested in it, and on my first day there, I managed to spill gallons of hot lead all over the floor, which I think delayed the printing of the local paper for a couple of hours. And in my lunch break, I went straight up to Micklegate Army Careers Office in York, and applied to join the army. So yeah, it was always the plan. There was never any option B. So thank goodness they accepted me.
I'm guessing you didn't include your print workshop experience on your army application. Previous experience of destroying a print shop.
Yeah. So when they got the list of jobs that I could do, but they reckoned I could have done all these things in the Royal Engineers, I thought, no, and anything that involves machinery isn't for me. Just give me a gun and let me crack on, and I'll be fine. So, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier on as well that you'd chosen to join rather than the Prince of Wales Own, which is the Yorkshire Regiment. You chose to join the Guards, and you're kind of remembering that postie who obviously left. I'm going to make a really bad joke now, but he left a really good stamp on you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sharing the background, I'll be doing Wembley Arena in a couple of weeks.
The old one.
So, how did you go around then, getting into the Guards as opposed to the local regiment?
This is where I all chuckle about this. So on that lunch break from work experience, I went to the recruiting office, feeling a little bit nervous, and I opened the door. And there were two recruiting sergeants sat there drinking coffee, chatting away to each other. One of them was a big, robust rugby playing type guy. And the other guy was the spitting image of Hank Marvin out the shadows. I'll never forget the pair of them. And I opened the door and sort of stood there in the doorway and looked at them, and they both looked up at me. And the big rugby player went, "What the fuck do you want?" And I couldn't get over it. I mean, nowadays, walking a recruiting office, you're like, laying the red carpet and, palm leaves and everything to attract them in.
Yeah.
And in those days, it was like, what the fuck do you want? And I went, I'd like to join the Coldstream Guards, please. And they both looked at each other, looked back at me, looked back at each other, and then just burst out laughing. and I thought, what's going on? I was looking at the sign. Is this the recruiting office,
Yeah.
And anyway, the rugby player would have said, "Come here, son, come here. Get over it. Stand against that wall there." And his mate, Hank Marvin, brought over an old wooden measuring pole and stuck it against me, measured me, and they started looking at each other and like, and I said, how old are you? And I went, 15, nearly 16. And they went, all right, so you'll be 18 in a couple of years. And they were using the fingers to count. And I said, yeah, you'll grow a couple of inches in 2 years. You'll be all right. Right, sit down over there. And that was it. And then the process started. When they found out my mock exam results, and I'd done reasonably well in whatever they were called in those days, I think they were called O-levels. They said, you could be an engineer, you could be a surveyor, and you could be this and that. But I was adamant. I was like, no, it's infantry. And then they tried to get me to join the local regiment, which was the standard thing to do. They always support the local regiment. I said, no, it's got to be the Guards. It's got to be the Coldstream Guards. And I remember one of them saying, why so obsessed with the Guards? And I basically gave them this big long story about how I thought, they were the elite and the best and all the rest of it. And I think it was not just because of the postman, but actually, I grew up with a generation who had that respect for the Guards division, because it did have a reputation at one point, which was very unusual. And I'd seen lots of films where the Guards were mentioned, and it always sounded very grand to me and like they were something special. And so I thought, yeah, this sounds like something I would be a part of. And I had a particular teacher at school who, I don't know if it was true, but I always got the idea they didn't think much of me. I thought, I want to show you what I can do. And I came back from the Army Selection Centre several months later, having got my guaranteed vacancy certificate, as they call it. And I went straight back to school over the moon. And it was a career session. They were all doing the career session. And I slipped in and sat down, and it was this teacher taking it who I didn't think really thought much of me. And he was going around the classroom asking people what they wanted to do with their lives. And they were all saying, build a hairdresser, whatever. He got to me and said, I'm going to join the army and go in the Coldstream Guards. And he said, yeah, well, just forget that. Imagine that you're not going to get in the army. What are you going to do then? And I pulled out this certificate and went, I'm in. I've got my thing here. I start on the 20th of August. And he went, oh, right, well, not much point you being here then, is there? You go off and do something else. So I went out and put my games kit on and went for a run. The school playing fields. So that's pretty much how it happened.
So where did you end up going then for your basic training? Because there's a basic training place at Harrogate, isn't there? Where did you end up?
So I joined as a junior leader, and before my time, there was something called the Infantry Junior Leaders Battalion based at Shorncliffe. But the decision was taken the year before I joined that junior leaders would train at their parent depots. And so I did my basic training at the Guards depot at Purbright.
Wow.
And anyone who's never experienced the Guards depot in the 1980s, I can tell you imagine an entire barracks with 3,000 guardsmen in there. This place was absolutely fucking mental. The just every minute of the day, you were surrounded by these big, tall, horrible, nasty people. Many of whom had just come back from the Falklands a couple of years earlier. And it, as a 60-year-old, it was just like, what am I being dropped into? Because, most of them were adult recruits, and we were just this little company of 16-year-olds. I remember getting off the train at Purbright with lots of other nervous-looking youngsters. We were all formed up in the car park at a place called Brookwood Station, and there was this line of big green army lorries lined up, and this big, tall, nasty-looking Scots Guard instructor stood there, and he was really quiet. And when we were all formed up, he wandered down the line and just looked us over, and he went, "Who wants to fight?" And we all sort of looked at each other and went, "Go on, who wants to fight?" And no one said anything. He went, "Well, if no one wants to fight, you've come to the wrong fucking place. Get on the truck." Yeah. And I was like, "Whoa, that's pretty portentous. What does that mean?" Yeah. So we did a year because the basic training for junior soldiers is a year long rather than 6 months, because you do all your education again. You do lots of leadership training as part of that. And it was absolutely horrendous, even for someone who was obsessed with the army and really wanted to do it. We started off with 63 in the platoon and 30 of us passed out. So,
wow.
more than 50% wastage rate. And the interesting thing is that at the very start of it, there were some lads there cocky lads from some pretty rough estates in places like Coventry and Newcastle and Middlesbrough, who were the big I am when they arrived, and within a couple of weeks they were gibbering wrecks, crying their eyes out, wanting the mummy, and off they went. It really did sort out, I hate to say it, the men from the boys. If you really wanted to be there and do it, then you get through it. But there were a lot of people who fancied the idea of being a soldier, but the reality of military life wasn't for them. So it was interesting. I mean, I don't agree with everything that was done to us in basic training in those days. It was of its time, and basic training is certainly more intelligent now than it used to be. But there is obviously a case for treating people pretty robustly in basic training. The requirements of a soldier, just like the requirements of being a police officer or anyone else that engages in that kind of work, has to be pretty robust, because otherwise how do you prepare them for the reality of what they're going to do?
Yeah. So what sort of time period are we talking? Are we early 80s, mid 80s?
Mid 80s. So I joined in 1985. Yeah.
So like you say, Falklands is not that long ago.
Yeah.
We're in the height of the Cold War. We're waiting for the Russians to come through the Fulda Gap.
Exactly.
Ireland's still going.
Yeah, bomber lots every other day. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's quite an active period. I mean, there's not many times when the army isn't active, but at that time, it was generally, thought it would fight a war within a number of years. So you kind of, you're not there to mess about. I kind of, because I did a very limited military thing. I was in the territorials for a number of years, right. in the Prince of Wales Zone.
Right, yeah.
Company B, Leeds Rifles.
Right.
But I remember thinking, that and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of a military career later on. But I remember thinking that this is, we're not playing at this. No. This could really happen at the time. So there is a fine line, isn't there, between discipline and abuse.
Yeah.
But there's also a fine line between discipline and not being disciplined enough, so you get killed in the first 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I won't speak about it publicly, but as a professional soldier, I can look back on my career and see moments where discipline in particular units, and occasionally on my own, wasn't what it should have been. And I've seen the consequences of that. Discipline is absolutely vital. What differentiates a professional army from a rebel with guns. That there is a difference. And actually, you can't organise yourselves and fight effectively at any level without a degree of discipline. The problem is people, when they hear the word discipline, it sounds like a dirty word, and they associate it with shouting and screaming and room inspections and all that stupid stuff. But actually, discipline is about the professionalism to do what's right, not what's easy, even when the pressure's on and your body and your mind is screaming to run away or hide or do something else. And it's saying, no, I've got to do this instead because this is the right thing to do. So without discipline, you're not going to be effective on the battlefield. But how you achieve that discipline is the key. You can achieve high levels of discipline which are unshakable through sensible measures. It doesn't require you to be shouting and screaming at people all the time. It's just about understanding that there is a standard that has to be met. And if it isn't met, then remedial action needs to be taken. And you've got to insist that the standard remains a standard. And it also means that people have to be prepared to be supervised, because one of the biggest complaints that people get about military services, all the bullshit, I was having my kit checked and this, that and the other, and I'm a grown up, I can do it myself. Well, yeah, everybody can do it themselves when they're not under pressure. But when you're tired, really tired, exhausted, deprived of sleep for days on end, or when you're frightened or angry, your judgment is not what it should be. It never will be. And you can't trust yourself to do the right thing every time without being checked. It is so easy for the human mind to decide to take shortcuts or to make poor judgments, be that, failing to pack the right equipment for an operation, or deciding to just shoot the prisoners because it's easier than processing them and backloading them, And if you read Bill Slim's Defeat into Victory, the account of the Burma campaign, right at the back, he writes these little mini essays about different aspects of the campaign.
Oh, right.
And one of the things that he talks about is discipline and leadership. And he said, the most effective units weren't the ones with the most advertised reputations or who bigged themselves up or, who could claim to be the most violent. It was the ones that as soon as they came out of the jungle would as quickly as possible reassume those outward signs of being disciplined soldiers. They'd get shaved, they'd wash their kit, they'd clean their weapons, and they'd start saluting the officers again. Because, although that all sounds like petty stuff, actually it is the glue that kind of holds you together as an organisation. And I would take Bill Slim's thoughts on that any day of the week, because let's face it, he's a man who deserves to be listened to. He's fought in the most arduous conditions against, the most ferocious enemy. So I think his thoughts on the subject are valid, and they very much match my own.
Yeah, I think until you've been put in a situation where you are under pressure for a lengthy period of time, or suddenly put under pressure from being, sat drinking a cup of tea to suddenly having to, react and do things, it's then that you realise that all those checks that you did and all that training that you did becomes automatic, and that that your kit's going to work, and that the people around you know what they're going to do when you ask them to do it. And that when you're all sat there drinking tea and watching reruns of the Sweeney or whatever, that really doesn't matter, does it? It's when the bomb drops or whatever happens. So I think it's extremely, extremely important part of a military service. And I think it gives you, I think it does, it gives you benefits in later life as well with focus and discipline when it comes to doing other projects and stuff. It certainly helped me without a shadow of a doubt in my service.
Yeah, it helps you prepare for uncomfortable things in life and gives you a sense of perspective over them, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So, just then, give us a sketch of your career then, from that little boy at Pirbright to the slightly older man who finished off his service.
So, when I passed out, I went straight to our 2nd Battalion, which at the time was on ceremonial duties in London. So I went there and wore the furry hat, did Trooper in the Colour and all that kind of thing, did Queen's Guards. But having said that, I always make the point that even though we were a ceremonial battalion, in a single year, I did 17 weeks of field training, including 2 overseas exercises, one to Kenya, one to Cyprus, and endless weeks on the ranges. So even as a ceremonial battalion, we were still doing all of the typical green soldiery stuff. And I think for my first year as a soldier, I got so much experience in that first year. I did an advanced signals course as well. I did a survival course. I did all kinds of stuff. So, the great thing I liked about the Guards is there was always lots of variety. You got all of the shiny stuff in front of the tourists and got to show off a bit, but actually you were still fully engaged in typical what we call green soldiering. So, I went there. We then went off, did a couple of years in Cyprus as the resident battalion, came back to London again, and that's when we then went off and did our first tour. The Gulf War happened, the first Gulf War, and our 1st Battalion, they got sent off as a prisoner handling battalion to the Gulf, and we got sent to South Armagh in Northern Ireland. Now, South Armagh, for those who don't know, was always known to the British Army as bandit country. It's right on the border with the Republic, and it's where the most ruthless, most well-trained, most capable provisional IRA units were based. Very, very dangerous place. I can't remember the exact statistics, but a significant proportion of British personnel that were killed during the Northern Ireland Troubles were killed in South Armagh. If you went there, you knew you were in the danger zone. And that first tour that I did, by this stage, I was already a Lance Sergeant, which is the equivalent of a full corporal in the rest of the army. So I've already got a section of like eight men to look after, and I'm now on my first operational tour. So for me, it's a baptism of fire, but I've also got other people to look after. And we'd only been there 2 nights. We were on a cordon right on the border doing a search operation. We were dug in for the night. And just as last light faded, the Provisional IRA decided they wanted to welcome us to the province and opened fire on us from across the border from a mountainside. My first experience of green tracer popping over the head. And I was sat there in my trench thinking, wow, this is real, isn't it? And I try and explain it to people, and I've never got over it, even though it's happened to me on numerous occasions. Those first few seconds when someone's trying to kill you,
yeah,
it's just the most surreal feeling that I just can't explain. It's a mix of fear, excitement, and outrage that somebody hates you that much that they're trying to end your life, and that they got up that morning with the sole intention of doing that. It's like reality just smacks you right in the face. It's really weird. I mean, it only lasts for a few seconds, and then the training kicks in, and you're busy doing whatever it is you've got to do. But those first few seconds, they're just absolutely unbelievable. I can't really explain what the feeling's like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did Northern Ireland. Sadly, lost a good friend over there, blown up by a big IED. All kinds of horrible things. We had to recover the body of what the IRA said was an informer. He was a farmer from the south who'd been seen speaking to the wrong people. So they kidnapped him and tortured him, then killed him and dumped him in our patch. And we had to sit there and sort of cordon it off while the robot searched him for booby traps, and then watch as the Catholic priest came along and did the last rites and everything else. So as a young 21, 22-year-old, it was a real education about the real world, the dirty world in which we all live. But actually, the professional confidence I gained from that was immense. I came back from Ireland a stronger, better, more capable soldier and commander. And then, the world went a bit crazy then, because the Berlin Wall came down, and the world just went mad. I remember packing up my boxes to move to Germany, because we had the amalgamations then as well, the first big defence cuts after the end of the Cold War. And I packed up my boxes to join the 1st Battalion in Germany. And I don't think I got to unpack those boxes for another 4 years, because we were literally just on the move all the time. The Balkans conflicts were happening. So we were over to Bosnia within months of arriving in Germany. And then I was coming back from there, and I was going over to Canada to do the big armoured exercises on the prairies. Then I went on my platoon sergeant's battle course. Then we were back in Northern Ireland again in South Armagh. And for about 4 or 5 years, we just didn't stop. It was just relentless. And it only really slowed down when I got sent off as an instructor to Sandhurst towards the back end of the 90s. And I did my time at Sandhurst as colour sergeant instructor for 2 years, came back, had to do the inevitable stores job, which every infantryman has to do at some point. So yeah, had to go remember how to count. Counting blankets and bullets and bombs and sausages and socks and everything. And then again, we were back in Northern Ireland, in Londonderry this time, for a 2-year residential tour, where I got promoted to company sergeant major and had a whale of a time running my own counter-terrorist company with a really, really capable company commander who I got on along famously with. We had a great tour there. And then after that, back to Sandhurst as a company sergeant major on the commissioning course for 2 years. Straight out of there, joined the battalion in Iraq, where I was in charge of police reform, which that could be a podcast in its own right. Pretty interesting.
You want to come to our place and do some police reform?
Yeah. I suppose at least most of your officers, A, speak English, B, don't do drugs, and C, aren't on the side of the terrorists. So it would probably be a bit easier.
Yeah. Well, they speak varying dialects of the Yorkshire accent, some of which are impossible to understand.
Yeah, I can imagine. And after that, I got back from Iraq. They sent me off. This is where the army was really clever. I found out then that I was going to become the regimental sergeant major of the battalion, which I never expected, because there were people who were taller and smarter and fitter than me. But for some reason, they gave me the job. And I knew that quite a long way out. And then they put me in charge of recruiting. And at the same time, we found out we were going to go to Afghanistan. So, the dice were kind of loaded. I knew I was going to take the battalion out there on what was going to be a pretty chunky operation. And if I wanted to go out there with a full battalion, it was my job to fill it. So off I went with my press gang, clubbing people on the streets of primarily of Yorkshire, actually.
Yeah, good lad.
And getting them in and getting them trained up in time for the deployment to Afghanistan. And Afghanistan really was my last hurrah. We went off and did that. And when I came back and about a year left, I opted not to go for a commission for various reasons. And then, it all sort of wound down after that. But I was very lucky. I had a varied career, worked with some amazing people, did some interesting stuff, and managed to come back with all my arms and legs and stories to tell. So, that was it.
I think the obvious question is, would you do it again?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I say that. I'm looking at my son doing it now, and he'll say, "Oh, we're going to do this next week or next year," and inwardly I sort of take a deep breath and go, "Crikey, I know what's coming." I don't tell him. I think it's important he experiences that with fresh eyes. Because with hindsight, you know how tough it's going to be. But at the time, you don't know what's coming, and you're young and you're up for the challenge, so you just take it as it comes. But when I think about it, everything I've got now, literally everything I've got and everything that I am, I think I owe to the Army, because the Army educated me again. The bits that high school wasn't very good at doing to me, the Army turned out to be really good at doing to me in terms of building confidence, getting me better at maths, just bringing myself out of myself, really, and developing me as a person, giving me new skills, new confidence. It's such a generator of social mobility is the Army. If people use it the right way, if they turn up, pin their ears back, listen, and get on with it, you get so much from an Army career. If nothing else, you come away with some amazing stories to tell that people will never believe, because they're so outrageous, So as a minimum, I've got great dits to spin in the pub.
Brilliant.
But I have an academic career now, which I never ever thought I'd do. But I find myself falling back on old experiences and old stories that are invaluable, because no one else has had those kinds of experiences. And it makes you so much more credible in front of an audience. And also your perception of what a crisis is very different when you've been in the military or the emergency services. So some people run around with their hair on fire over the silliest things. And you learn to keep a sense of perspective about it, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things I've learned during my career is that 99% of the time when people think there's a crisis, it really, really isn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I remember talking to a guy from the air ambulance, and he brought the air ambulance down in this like really enclosed spot to get to a casualty, and it was absolutely amazing. And I was just chatting to him, and I said, "Don't mind saying that was fucking amazing. That was absolutely brilliant." And he just looked at me and he says, "Ken, it were easy. Nobody was shooting at me."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you kind of, it does give you a different perspective on life in general. So your lad now, is he in the same regiment? Is he in the Guards?
He is, yeah. I mean, I never thought he was going to go in the military. I never pushed him that way. And he's a clever lad, he's much cleverer than I was at that age. He got A's or whatever the top grade is and all his GCSEs. And then when he went to college, very technically minded, but then turned around one day and said, "I'm joining the Army and I'm joining the Guards." So I was a bit taken aback, but clearly very proud. And he went and did basic training, which he found unbelievably tough. And, a couple of points, it was touch and go if he would get through. But he did, he stuck it, which I'm proud of him for, because that's part of the process, isn't it? You've got to go through that agony and fear and that doubt, and then come out the other end. And that's what makes you the better person. And he's done that. And by sheer fluke, he was posted to my old company, to my old platoon. And his commanders were all my guardsmen. Wow. So now all his bosses are the people that I used to be the boss of, and they all know me, and they all give him a suitably hard time because of that, So I think
I remember, I can't remember which event it was, but I'm sure I remember you pointing out your lad in a in full dress at can't remember, Queen's funeral or something, or
right,
trooping a parade or something like that. And that must be an immensely proud feeling to see him doing those ceremonial duties.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, he kind of joined a really special place in history, because he did Trooping of the Colour, which was the last time the Queen attended Trooping Colour. He then did the funeral for the Queen. He then did the coronation for the King, and he's done the Trooping of the Colour with the King. So these are all sort of big one-off events that will kind of never happen again, and he's been a part of all of them. And actually, dare I say that the moment I felt proudest, we'd gone down to London. I think my daughter was at some concert or other. We dropped her off, and it coincided with the first dress rehearsal of the Trooping of the Colour that my son was doing, the very first one. And I knew all the timings, of course, of when they'd be coming off the square and the rest of it. So we dropped my daughter off, and we hurtled down towards Green Park to get to the Mall, in the hope of catching them marching back to Wellington Barracks. And literally, just as we got to the barriers on the side of the Mall, the procession came marching past, and they struck up the old company march of one of my old companies that I was in, which is the Old Grey Mare. It's a fantastic tune. And as that struck up and they marched past, there he was, the right-hand man of the column.
Oh,
right next to us. He came past, and we could see him quite clearly. So we're like waving and shouting with Ned, and we sort of saw him smile, and all his mates are going, "Oh, who's that? Who's that shouting at you, Johnny?" And because he's called Scott, and we were shouting, "Oh, Scott, Scott!" And there was a French couple next to us going, "Oh, is that the Scots Guards?" And went, "No, that's our son. He's called Scott." And they were like, "Oh my God, that's your son!" And it was just an amazing moment. I was really, really proud. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So you mentioned earlier on that about using wargaming in service, and how chain of command would have been an absolutely fantastic tool to have had back in the day. So how did wargaming fit in with military life as a training tool?
Okay, so I'll bore you with a bit of military theory here. So there are three components of fighting power. You've got the physical component, which is the bullets and the tanks and the guns and the people. You've got the moral component, which is fighting spirit and the discipline and the will to win. And then you've got the conceptual component, which is actually understanding how war works and how you manage it all. And we're really good at the physical component, and we're pretty good at the moral component as well in the British Army. The conceptual component is the one that takes a lot of doing, because it takes time. You've got to exercise your brain, and you've got to find the time to do the reading and work through problems and try and develop best practice, so to speak. And every now and then we would do commanders weeks where you try and get people thinking and develop the sort of the cognitive skills that commanders need. Mm-hmm. And it was one day, it's when we were on the tour in Northern Ireland, actually, and we were on a break from internal security and counter-terrorism stuff, and we had a training day for the junior non-commissioned officers, so the corporals and young sergeants, and we put together a scenario that involved a company offensive operation and what they call an advance to contact. And we started off by issuing orders to the non-commissioned officers in the morning. They had to go and extract those orders and produce their own for their own sections and platoons. And then they came back and delivered those orders to us as if we were the troops. So that gave them practice in the order sequence. And then what we did is we went into a room where we set up a whole load of terrain with model figures, and we would walk through this company advance to contact. And it was just bare terrain. There was nothing on the board. And each of them were given their 8 figures per section or whatever it is for a platoon. And they would have to place them out in the correct tactical formations. And then step by step, we would do the advance to contact using the principles of firing maneuver with, 1 foot on the ground at all times, all that kind of thing. And then at a certain point, we pressed a button and we'd had pre-recorded battlefield noise. I think actually we just had a video of Saving Private Ryan going on in the background, something like that. but we played it through speakers, and suddenly the room was just filled with gunfire and noise and explosions. And at that point, it went into real time, and I'd made up these little dummy bunkers, and I just put one on the centre of the table, and I said, right, okay, that's right in front of your section. You're in contact. What happens next? And they had to go on the radio because they all had the radios on, and we had a live radio network set up. And he had to go on and give the contact report. Then he had to decide if he was going to take it himself or refer it to the platoon commander. And then they had to give quick battle orders, and they had to write them out on the little cards, then read them back to us, still with all this battlefield noise going on, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but just that cacophony of noise put them under a lot of pressure, trying to think with that noise going on around them. And once they'd given the orders, they then started moving the figures. And we let them move the figures to the first bound position. And then we put another bunker on and said, right, you've gone round here and you've just noticed there's another bunker. What happens now? And then the quick battle orders had to be rewritten and, plans changed. And we walked our way through that. And then we started imposing casualties. And then we brought on enemy figures for a counterattack. And all the way through, we had this noise playing, and they were doing it live on the radio at the same time. And at the end of the day, when we finally switched the noise off, they also went, oh, fucking hell, they hadn't been expecting that. They thought that was going to be just a little old play with some toy soldiers on the thing. And actually introducing the noise and then bringing it into real time really put them under pressure in terms of their decision-making cycle. And it was actually a really successful day. And my only regret is that we didn't get the chance to do things like that more often. And later down the years, when I discovered Chain of Command, I thought, that actually would have been a really good system for that kind of exercise. We could have built a lot more into it using the Chain of Command rules. So, yeah, I think Wargaming's got huge utility, certainly within the infantry, in military service. But I think all arms could use it equally as usefully.
Yeah, there's Tom Egan. Do you know Tom from Ireland?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
he's kind of interested in that side of thing, and there's a dare I mention another War Games podcast, but there's a lad called The Fighting Kentucky, and he's got a War Games podcast, and he is introducing that at the moment into some elements of the American forces, using red and blue forces and soldiers and realistic terrain. So I think it's an excellent learning tool, and it's been perceived as a game in many areas, whereas it does have genuine learning.
The thing for me is that it allows you to picture the battlefield. And I remember, in my day when I was going through junior command training, it was a sand model with little bits of coloured card, to try and illustrate how it all worked. And you kind of understood the mechanics, but you couldn't quite picture it. But when the terrain is really realistic and you've got the actual figures and you can see the gun group and you can see the rifle group and all the rest of it, it brings it to life in a way which pretty realistic, and I think just adds clarity. So yeah, I think it's a great tool.
So as a former serving soldier, then who's seen active combat, how are your thoughts about wargaming periods or conflicts that you've been involved in? It's something that people have mixed feelings about. I just wondered what your thoughts were on, say, seeing an Afghanistan game at Partisan or something like that.
It doesn't bother me, to be honest. I don't find it odd. People have played with toy soldiers for hundreds, if not thousands of years. If you go up to medieval times, you'd have found kids with little wooden knights, fighting each other. It's a game at the end of the day. And so it doesn't bother me. I suppose an extension of the conversation is what do I feel about reenactors? And I kind of got mixed feelings with that, because on the one hand, I'm really interested in history, and I am fascinated to see what the uniforms look like. And, I see people dressed up, whether it's the sealed knot or, World War II reenactors, think, oh, yeah, that's interesting. They've got all the kit on and they look the part, and I can kind of picture it. I think the problem comes is when people try to live the role, I think that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because, again, it's going to sound really snobbish, but when you've been a professional soldier, you can spot someone who's playing at being a soldier. You know, just the way someone stands, the way they hold the weapon, you know, just the way they wear the kit, you can just tell. And when you've done it for real, it does look a little bit like kids in the dressing up box. But you know, I appreciate the role of living history and reenactment. I appreciate the historical value of it. And with gaming, you know, I don't think anyone's pretending they really are a general. You know, it is ultimately just a game played by people who are fascinated with history, and I've got no issue with that. It doesn't bother me. And actually, you know, I've got some figures somewhere from Iraq, you know, Iraq style figures that I've painted up, what have you. And actually, my farewell gift to the battalion when I left was a big wooden case with 2 war games dioramas in it. One was our first ever battle, which was the Battle of Dunbar in 1650, and I painted up all the English Civil War style figures and Scots Covenanters fighting in the middle of a river. And then on the other side is a diorama of our number 3 company in a battle in Afghanistan. You know, with all the modern figures fighting inside the compound, and they're sort of side by side. And I think it called in something like 350 years of glory or something like that, you know. And that's still there in the sergeant's mess on one of the stairwells. So, yeah, I don't have any issue with it personally.
Well, that's fantastic. It's lovely to hear. I know some people do, maybe they've had an experience, certainly from Vietnam or something along those lines, where they find it difficult. But it's interesting to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, so thank you very much for that.
I get it. You know, I mean, I said before, I grew up in a generation who'd all been in the Second World War, and that you know, that generation rarely spoke about it. If you did ask about it, and you know, they could see that you were genuinely interested, you know, they would tell you what they've been through. And I think, you know, as a veteran myself now, people often ask me about my experiences. And some people do say, you know, so have you ever really been at the sharp end and, you know, done the really dangerous stuff? And I kind of don't want to shy away from it because I'm lucky. I'm not broken by war. In fact, if anything, I think it's made me a stronger person. So I'm comfortable with everything that happened in my career. And there were bad days. There were some absolutely awful days, but you know, I can rationalise them. I understand that it was what it was, but it's been and it's gone, and I can deal with it and talk about it. But at the same time, you never want to be accused of telling war stories, you know, and sort of swinging the lantern, so to speak. So it's a strange one. I think, you know, history should be spoken about, and it is important to record experiences and understand what people went through. It's just a case of finding a way of doing it with a degree of appropriateness. I think that's what it comes down to. You know, you've got to judge carefully what's appropriate and what isn't.
It's a lot easier to talk about things with people who've been through it. I find, you know, there's no barriers when I talk with other people who've done my job. But then there are people, like, from my point of view, if somebody invites me to a murder mystery weekend, I'm just going to tell them to fuck off. I really am not interested.
I know what you mean. I'm the same with paintball. Yeah, do you want to go paintballing? No, do I?
Well, thank you very much for that, Andy. That's been a lovely chat. Thank you for talking about that period of your life. I think it was really interesting. I hope a lot of people will get a lot from that. So thank you very much for that. We're going to lighten the mood quite considerably next by doing some quizzing.
Oh, God.
Okay, so we're in section 3, the features section of the Yorkshire Gamer podcast, and this is when we put Andy under absolutely no pressure whatsoever and ask him a few daft questions about the hobby just to get a bit of conversation going. So most of these are a yes or no or simple, you know, 1 or 2 word answers. There is a massive, unapologised for regional bias with a lot of these questions. So you should be all right. Coming from York, you should be all right. So, question 1, Andy, go big or go home?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Question 2, contrast paints. Are they great or are they a gimmick?
I've got no idea what contrast paints are. I keep seeing people talk about them, but I've got no idea what they are, and I've never used them, and I wouldn't know what to do with them if I had them.
You're in the right place. Don't worry about that. I'll give you a tick for that. So, choosing paintbrushes, do you go all posh and southern, Winsor and Newton, or Yorkshire-made Pro Art?
Whatever I can get my hands on, I normally buy them off Amazon. Just whatever looks like is the right thing. Yeah.
Are you in the Sean Clark rat hair?
Yeah,
two
probably.
£2 for six. £2 for six. That'll do.
Yeah,
That'll
pretty
do.
much. Yeah.
Question 4, 96 figures. Do you think that's an army or a unit of pike?
That's definitely a unit of pie. You need a lot more than that for an army.
Oh, brilliant. That's all I like to see. Question 5, 6x4 table. Is that a big game or a small game?
That's nowhere near big enough for me. I need a whole living room floor.
Good lad. Good lad. Question 6, choosing armies. Do you like points-based or historical orders of battle?
Orders of battle any day of the week.
You're doing very well so far, sir. Very well indeed. When you're painting, do you mix your paints using a wet palette or an old bit of MDF?
Got no idea what a wet palette is. I've seen it mentioned a couple of times. So mine is a plastic lid off an old curry box. That's
a good choice. That is a good choice. We've had some crackers. We've had old bits of newspaper. The top of drinks cans, when you turn them upside down and you use that bit there.
Oh, that's not a bad idea.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
That is.
I
like that one. It's coming to Kickstarter soon. Yorkshire Gamer. Turning the cans upside down and selling them for £5 each.
I was going to say, make a fortune. Brandon.
Question 8. Undercoating figures when you're painting, do you go black or white?
Oh, this is in the process of change. So for years, I would go black, but that's because I learned to paint using Warhammer paint guides out of the magazine, and they always used to paint black. And also with my gaming group in Germany, they used to spray black and just touch paint.
Oh yeah.
With 15mm. So I did that for years, but I found that as my eyesight has changed over the years, I really struggle to see the detail with black undercoat. So I've generally tried grey of late, but I've seen people use all kinds of colours, like really light browns and stuff like that, depending on what the uniform is. So I'm in the experimental phase, Ken, at the minute.
I'll give you half a point.
No tricks to boat here. What's the next answer, by the way?
Black.
All right.
So, question 9. Well, let's see how this goes, because you were born in Yorkshire, but you've travelled the world. Yeah. So, Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee?
Well, again, I think my answer is going to be safe. There was a time when I would have said coffee because it was the only way I could function.
Yes,
but I can't drink coffee now for various health reasons. So I'm very much a Yorkshire tea man. Absolutely.
Excellent. Normal, or do you go for the Yorkshire Gold? Do you go Harrogate and go for Yorkshire Gold?
I'm not posh enough for Harrogate. No.
I like the normal more than the Yorkshire Gold, I have to say.
Very much. It's the line infantry of the tea world. So
it is. Soldier of the line of the tea world. I like that analogy. So Yorkshire tea, if you're listening, I don't mind freebies. Send them in. So war games units. Do you like them tightly packed or socially distanced? Obviously, if it's historically correct.
I prefer tightly packed, but I really struggle with basing them when they're too tightly packed. So my Wars of the Roses, which I'm in the middle of painting up, they're kind of halfway house. They're as tightly packed as I can get them, while still being able to get in between to base them. Yeah. So kind of half and half. Yeah. But I don't like them all spaced out. You get some units where they are really spaced out, but they're meant to be in a block formation. It doesn't look right, does it? So I'd rather have them shoulder to shoulder where possible.
Do you base in single rank or 2 rank?
A combination.
No, just a top tip for if you're basing in 2 ranks is to glue the back rank down and put the polyfiller or whatever it is to build up over the top of the bases, and then just have it to where the back of the front rank is. Leave that to dry, and then put your front rank on, so you're only building up around
on the front. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah,
free that one.
I shall bear that in mind.
So, question 11. We have got a 2-hour club game or a weekend monster game.
I'd love to do a weekend monster game. If I'm honest, that's what we used to do in Germany. These days, I'm normally having to sort of squeeze it in where I can, so I'm going with 2-hour ones. But my preference is for the big game over a longer period.
Excellent. This again. You're a travelled man, so this could be interested. Avocados, are they just posh mushy peas?
Avocado. I tried one for the first time in my life last year, and I shall never try one again. Most pointless, tasteless piece of kit I ever come across. What are they for? Yeah,
exactly. Every time I speak to an avocado proponent, they always go, "Oh, well, you put some chili flakes on it, and you do this and you do that." And he said, "Yeah, but that just tastes of chili, then." Yeah,
exactly. I just thought, I mean, apparently it's meant to be good for you, but I just, God, no thanks. Give me mushy peas any day.
Excellent. I don't know what we're missing without the mushy peas.
Exactly.
Question 13. No pressure on you here, Andy, but this is the universal question that 63 other people have answered one way. So, round dice, are they allowed or banned on your table? Spherical dice.
I wouldn't know what to do with round dice, Ken. I wouldn't have a clue what to do with them. I've got 6-sided dice and they do me fine. If I see a rule set that requires anything else, I don't use the rules because I can't be done with them.
No, I think I've only got one, but if I had a stack of them, I think I would keep them in case there was a zombie apocalypse, and I could use them as like grape shot from some old blunderbuss or something like that. Other than that, no. So, question 14. You're going down the chippy. Would you choose haddock or cod?
Yeah, you see, I'm split on this one. It's tough. Cod feels traditional, but haddock, you get much bigger flakes of fish, and it generally tends to be whiter. Yeah,
the Yorkshireman coming out in there. You're getting a bigger fish.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that question. I can't remember that. I think I'll probably have to go with haddock. Is that the wrong answer?
Good. I went for cod. Cod.
I mean, cod rolls off the tongue, but practical experience tells me that haddock has greater utility.
Cod used to be. We're going off topic here, but don't worry, I've made a career of it. Cod used to be the mainstay, as far as I remember, and then we had that little tussle with Iceland, didn't we? Where we were, we were barging fishing boats with frigates and stuff like that, and it all got a bit tetchy. And then the cod supply kind of went downhill a bit, and we started to get haddock where I lived. But I still love a bit of cod. Oof.
Yeah. I think it's because haddock, you can smoke haddock as well. I like a bit of smoked haddock. That's probably that's probably why you're towards it, probably.
Arbroath Smokies.
I'd have to be the turncoat on that one. I could switch sides any day of the week.
Yeah. Not understandable. In the Civil War of Fish, you'd fight for whoever paid you the most. There's no allegiance.
I'd be very mercenary about it.
Yeah, there's no allegiance tax. Question 15. Do you like a good table in a set of rules, like a casualty table, or do you prefer dice-based rules?
I think probably. Oh, that's a tough one, actually. I think probably dice, and I'm going to say that simply because the thing that annoys me the most when I'm playing a game is having to constantly refer back to a book and flip through pages and remind myself what something is. So the idea of reading through endless tables, I think, would probably annoy me in the long term. So I think yeah, I'm probably going to go with dice there.
Goes with dice.
But I'm a bit on the fence with it, to be honest.
Good job. This is not decisive leadership here, the way you've got to choose one or the other. Question 16. 28 mil is king, yes or no?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Question 17. Unpainted miniatures allowed on the table, yes or no?
I wouldn't do it personally. The aesthetics is really important to me, so I wouldn't do it.
Good. Now, you mentioned you weren't particularly into sport, but this is a football-related question. And there's no coincidence I'm wearing a Bradford City top. But you've got to choose between Bradford City or Leeds United.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I'm probably going to have to go with Leeds on this one, Ken. For several reasons, through a process of deduction. One, Leeds is slightly closer to York. B, I know absolutely nothing about Bradford City Football Club, but at least with Leeds, I know that song that they had out in the 70s, and I can sing it.
Yeah.
And I can chant "Dirty, Dirty Leeds" and name some Leeds United players. So I'd probably have to go with Leeds United. I'm sorry, Ken.
Yeah. Apart from winning the FA Cup in 1913, Bradford really haven't done anything. But
you'll have your moment again.
Exactly. One day the sun will shine on Bradford again. And games work. Oh, sorry. Easy one for you, this mate. Easy one. Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
Oh, God Almighty! Yeah. Well, clearly it's God's own county, isn't it? Yeah.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Don't want to go to the dark place.
Oh, they've got witches and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. God, strange part of the world.
When I worked, I worked along the name you can't say border for quite a long time, and you'd on a night shift you'd sit there and just look at the mist and the strange three-headed creatures lurking
dragons
on the side of
the the howling of wolves.
I'm not going over there. I'm not going over there. So, question 20. Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil, yes or no?
Guy, Games Workshop, it's like a double-edged sword. It's like politics, isn't it?
That's why I put this question in.
So, I see the value of Games Workshop. They have some lovely looking miniatures. That back in the day, they did some great work in terms of paint guides and stuff that helped me develop my painting skill. And it's a great way of getting really young people into the hobby. But a couple of issues with them. They're way too expensive. I mean, the prices are ridiculous because you're paying for all the creative writers who do all the backstory work. And that drives up the prices. They're ridiculous prices now. Secondly, their community can be really, really toxic, sadly. You see the Games Workshop community online, particularly in America, and they get really nasty about, imaginary things. It leads to some strange places. And their paints now are just shite. They're old paints. I used to use them religiously in the 90s. They were really good paints. I've still got some from the 90s. They're like 30 years old, still going strong. Colours that I don't use as much, like pinks and light greens and stuff, but they're still as good as new, really good quality. The last few paints I had from them a few years ago, just rubbish. They dry up and go claggy and horrible, so I just don't use them at all now.
There's very few Games Workshop paints I use. I wish they would. I just wish they'd use normal names instead of Goblin Chunder and all this sort of bloody stupid stuff that they use. But there's a really dark silver. There's a lead belcher, and then there's a darker one than that that I still use. And their base yellow is quite good for an undercoat for yellow. But I very, very rarely use anything other than that. And I've just realised that I've used the old template for my notes. So you missed the new modern question. which has replaced the chippy question. So I'll let you have a go at that one. And that is war games rules. Do you have, again, there's a slight bias in this question. Do you have glorious imperial measurements, i.e. inches, or French money?
Yeah, give me imperial any day of the week.
Glorious. Excellent. 85%, mate. You did really well there. You did very well.
Oh, is that a pass?
That's a pass. You got a lot of halves as well. There was only one that you were completely wrong on.
The Bradford City one, by any chance?
Yes. Well, there we go. So, next section that we like to do is Room 101, and that's George Orwell's Room of Horror. That was a TV show for many years, and it's just a little section of the show that you can tell us about pet hate of your hobby, of the hobby that's really grinds your gears, and it's a free space, so you can say whatever you want, and see whether I agree and shove it into the vault.
Yeah.
So, have you got one?
I suppose really it's a very generic one, and it's the War Games Police, or the button
war game.
the button counters, or whatever you want to call them. Thankfully that there aren't that many. You don't come across many. There are hundreds of them in the Warhammer community. Not so many in the War Games community, but you do find the odd one or two, and everyone's got their preferences, and amongst certainly on the Twitter community, War Gamers, that there are some points that we all like to tongue in cheek, argue about, be it the basing of tanks or 28mm or 15mm or whatever it might be. So that's all good-natured stuff. But you do occasionally come across someone, and for them it's all about winning, or it's all about proving that they know more than somebody else. And I've never had time for that in any walk of life. I think those people spoil the joy of whatever it is that you're doing, because it is only a game. It ain't a matter of life and death. And people do wargaming for their own reasons. I mean, you've got that question, the Venn diagram question. People do it for all kinds of different reasons. Yeah. And the important thing is that people enjoy the hobby and keep coming back and encourage others to get involved with it. Because unless you had, the large eclectic mix of hobbyists that we've got, the firms that facilitate it couldn't exist. They couldn't make the business models work. So it's important that we all stick together and make allowances for each other. So yeah, my big bore is anyone who tries to impose order on the War Games community, because like real war, I think the War Games community should be slightly chaotic and all over the place. And the idea of someone trying to lay the law down doesn't attract me at all. So that would be my only real hate.
Well, when I post things now on Facebook, I know what's coming. Somebody's going to get, you've done this wrong or whatever.
Yeah.
So I now have a thing called Pendant's Corner. Now, of course, Pendant's Corner, if you read Private Eye, is a joke on pedants.
Yeah. Because
obviously a pedant is somebody who picks holes in stuff and eggs out and wants everything. So immediately a pedant will see pendants and go, "You've spelled pedants wrong." So immediately I've won.
Yeah, on the hook.
So I'm just laughing. I'm just laughing. As soon as I type it, I'm laughing already.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what people are going to say about stuff. So your flag's too big, or you've painted this wrong, or that, or the other. And I do a bit of research before I paint my stuff. So
yeah, God, that's why I've said it. Because when I look at my figures, they're full of mistakes. My Wars of the Roses figures, the Earl of Warwick's badge is pointing the wrong way, and I've got an English Civil War cavalry regiment where the flag's upside down because I thought it was a crown, but it's not. It's meant to be some kind of cradle. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned this on other interviews I've done. I have got previous for doing that deliberately, just to wind people up. I once glued the machine guns on my A10 cruiser tanks the wrong way around. Just upside down.
Yeah.
just to wind people up. Just wait for somebody to say, "Yes, got you." Anyway, it keeps me going. It keeps me happy. That's the main thing.
Absolutely.
So the final little bit of this section is the Desert Island war game, and much like the radio show, you are on a desert island, and you can obviously you get the Bible and the works of Shakespeare, but you could take a desert island game with you, and that can be absolutely anything you want, any size. It doesn't even have to be a war game. It could be anything that you want. So, is there a game that you would take to keep yourself occupied?
I think probably for sheer variety, it would probably have to be Chain of Command, because you can just do so much with it. You know, different scenarios, different phases of the war. And actually, the great thing about Chain of Command is, you know, it's in the modern era, so to speak. So you could adapt it very quickly to post 1945 without too much trouble. So for sheer flexibility, it would probably be Chain of Command.
Excellent. I'm sure there's a few turtles who'll be able to have a game with you on that desert island. I'm sure you'll be fine. A couple of parakeets, pushing throwing the dice, and after, is it ones you want for Chain of Command? I can never remember.
I'm not like that.
Six? Yeah. I can't remember. Sorry, Rich. You've had the advertising, but I can't remember how the dice work.
There's one where you do something with, and you save the points up and do something with it.
That's the one. Yeah.
I think it's 6.
Yeah. We'll blag it, mate. We'll blag it. Nobody will know us. We don't know. So, is there a book that you would take to? Is there a book that's particularly had an impact on you that you would like to keep and read?
Yeah, I think that the book would have to be the centenary edition of Lord of the Rings. I bought that book way back in the early 90s, I think it was. I'd heard of Lord of the Rings. I'd read The Hobbit at school, and I never actually realised that it was connected to the Lord of the Rings. Excuse me. But the centenary edition, it's all 3 volumes in one big volume. So you've got the whole book, hardbacked, and it's filled with the most beautiful illustrations you can imagine. So it's a beautiful looking book. And of course, the Lord of the Rings itself is scenario after scenario. It's just the most marvellous tale. It's the fundamental tale of good versus evil. It replicates the journey of mankind over and over again in every historical period. You can see the analogy there, and it's got some great battles in it, which is what I particularly like. It's got everything you need in that one book. So yeah, I'd probably take that.
Yeah, it is a fantastic book that you can go back to so many times. I saw a documentary recently on how Tolkien's World War I experiences affected the way that he wrote, and how and once you read that, you can see how some of the characters develop, and it's very interesting indeed. Excellent. And finally, a war games unit. What would be the one war games unit that you would like to take? I think you might have mentioned it, but is there one unit that sticks out in your memory for any particular reason?
This is where I embarrass you, Ken, because I wouldn't take one on my own. I'd take one of your massive pipe blocks from the Italian Wars with me.
Good lad.
Because they absolutely fascinate me, and that's why I asked you if you were going to have them at one of the shows, because I see them in the photographs that you put on the internet, and I can't stop looking at them. It's a bit like they have the same effect on me as a Lady Butler painting. You know, when you look at like there's the famous picture of the square at Waterloo with the cavalry attacking it, and I've got that on my wall downstairs, and I could look at it all day long and find something new. You know, every face has got a different expression. There's so much detail, and when I look at those pipe blocks, you know, it's not just 96 men in the same uniform. Everything's individual, and they're all in different poses, different facial expressions, and I find it fascinating. You know, just looking through them. And
Thank you.
Put it on a turntable and just turn it around and just stare at it for hours. Honestly, I could. And again, it's that aesthetic. For me, the aesthetic's really important in wargaming. And your pipe blocks are just fabulous. I wish I had the patience and you know, the speed of painting to be able to put together something for the Italian Wars, but I just think it's a bridge too far for me. So I just sit and admire it from a distance.
Well, it will be at Partisan. It will be at the other Partisan. All my pipe blocks this time round. One of the little tricks that I do, and is that I slightly stagger. I base everything in 2 ranks, and I slightly stagger the rear rank so that when you look at the base, you're looking and you're seeing faces through the gaps.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Rather than everybody being regimentally lined up as you would at Trooping of the Colour or whatever, where everyone is bang on square behind each other. That slight offset gives you something to look at.
Yeah.
So whatever angle you look through, you're seeing different faces and different lights, etc. So that's what I do.
Yeah, no, a good trick.
Another free tip for you. Educational.
Thank you very much. I wish I'd done that with Was of the Roses. Now I'm sat here thinking about it. I've kind of put them one behind the other. And even though they are reasonably tightly packed, you can still see the gaps. And actually, if I'd have done that, it would have just given it that more integrated look. Yeah, maybe I'll get around to rebasing them one day.
Yeah. Free tip. Yeah. Right, we'll move on to our final section, mate, and have a chat about your books.
All right, yeah.
So we're in the final section of the show now, and as you all know, this is where we kind of talk about an individual topic with our guests. And as we mentioned in the introduction to the show, Andy's got a number of books out. When did the first one come out, mate?
February 2010 was the first one. That was
2010. Yeah. So we're 14 years in now to your authoring career. So if we went back now and went in one of the shoeboxes in your loft and got Andy Johnson's school report from 1970 whatever, would it say shows promise as a writer in your English report?
I don't know if it would say that. I mean, I did okay at school. I wouldn't say I was particularly talented, but, you know, I had parents whose attitude was get your head down, get your exams, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I behaved myself and I did my schoolwork and I got some reasonable O levels and stuff. Actually, English literature is one of the subjects where I did quite well at. English grammar, not so much. I still have to work hard with grammar and spelling and syntax and all that kind of stuff. But I was always quite good at the sort of narrative style of English. And, you know, my best results of all my exams was history. So, yeah, I suppose there's something there in my past. But my author career probably comes from the fact that I am just a bit of a daydreamer. You know, I've always been a daydreamer, making stories up in my head. And it sort of got to the stage where I had all these ideas and stories in my head and I just needed to get rid of them and make some space. So the easiest thing to do was start writing them down. And I actually thought the first thing I was going to do was write a fantasy novel, but it ended up being a historical one, even though it's alternative history. That's just sort of how it happened.
Did you write short stories before you went for a full book? Or was it this process of, you know, having these stories in your head and not really getting them down?
I don't have a really formal way of writing. What it is, I get an idea, I get a theme, I get an overall idea, and what I tend to do is I write in my brain kind of the opening couple of paragraphs and the closing couple of paragraphs of the book, and then I have to find something to fill all the middle bit.
Join the dots.
Yeah, that's it. That's literally how it happens. I've got an idea of opening the book and what it feels like, and then how I'd conclude it. And like I say, there's a general theme, but then I've sort of got to put it all together. And certainly the first one, so Lower Nord, was very organic. You know, as I went along, there were bits in there that I chopped out in the end, because it's a massive book. You know, it's like 200,000 words, which for a novel is really big. And I think there was another 80,000 words that I'd written somewhere along the line, and I ended up just taking it out because it felt a little bit like padding, and plus it was just going to make the book unwieldy. So I sort of had to cut a bit out. Yeah, so it was a very organic process. I would say that I've learned a lot. You know, as each book's come out, I've learned more about the technical means of writing. in terms of structure and story arc and characterization, all that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is that of all the books, even though the later books are technically more proficient, Say Low and Ord 14 Years On is still the one that sells the most copies. It's the popular story. And I think because it's so raw and original, I think that's the one that captures people's imagination.
And I think, this is an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The topics that you've written about are military and history related. Was that a deliberate choice? And I don't mean this in any negative way, but to make life easier, to write within those frames of reference rather than doing, science fiction or romance or whatever. Was that speaking from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that I understood from the outset was that you will write a better novel if you know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And I say that not because I think I'm a historian, because I'm absolutely not. And I know that a historian could pick, any number of faults in the novels that I've written. I'm interested in history, so the historical backdrop is useful because I'm interested in it. But for me, it was about communicating the experience of war. And you'll notice that there are two key features in any novel that I write. One of them is lots of swearing, and the other one is lots of violence. You won't find many love stories in my books. It's all about people doing violence to each other whilst uttering profanities. And I think that came about for a number of reasons. About the time that I started writing the books when I left the army, I was really conscious. I'd just done some youth work, and I'd taken a group of school children back to the beaches at Dunkirk and the various battlefields of that campaign with some old World War II veterans as a kind of educational trip. And I'd seen the power that had in changing the attitudes of the young children, because, apart from visiting the battlefields on the night time at the hotel, we had the children interviewing the veterans.
Wow.
Many of whom were speaking about their experiences for the first time since 1940 and getting really choked up and emotional about it, and seeing the reaction of the kids to this and thinking, wow, these old people that we take the mickey out of sometimes, these people were young once and did some serious stuff. And it was hugely powerful exercise. And I thought, we're at that point in history where there aren't many of that generation left. And at some point in the not too distant future, there will be none left. And World War II will cease to be a living memory. And there's a danger that as time goes by, we forget the reason why we enjoy all the freedoms that we have. Literally everything that we have, this world that we live in, as a result of the fact that an entire generation sacrificed its youth. Even if they weren't killed or injured in the war, they put their youth on hold, marriage and kids and careers and everything, to make sure that we have what we've got now. And I didn't want people to forget that. And at the same time, it was at the height of the kind of PlayStation generation phase where everyone's playing these online war games and things. And I thought and of course I just come back from two very intense conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I thought, I don't think people quite understand what war is like and how utterly chaotic it is, how utterly horrible it is, and just how physically difficult it is. When we watch films about the war, they always make everything look so simple. It's like, the most recent Napoleon film, that all the guns are lined up and he waves his hand and they all fire and everyone falls through the ice, and it's all very clinical. And actually, war is just absolute fucking chaos every minute of the thing. And I thought, I want to write something which portrays this for real. So I did. And when you read the books, it's not written, if you like, as a continuous narrative from a single point of view. You dive in and out of the same piece of action, but from different perspectives of different people on the same side. So you see the same incident maybe 2 or 3 times, but from different perspectives. I wasn't sure if people would get that when I first wrote it, but it seems that people do. And what I wanted to try and do was just convey the the reality of what it feels like to be in those situations. Now, I've never done anything as intense as World War II. I've never had to do an opposed beach landing, for instance. But, I've been in a few scraps, and I know how chaotic it is. And a lot of the stuff that you read in the book comes from personal experience. There's one in Crucible of Fate where a German tank crew is going through a wood that's just been shelled, and they're being thrown all over the place inside the tank as it falls into ditches and goes over broken tree stumps. And that comes back from my experience being a warrior commander in Germany. And as I was writing it, I could feel every time my head banged off the gun, and I was bouncing from the side of the turret.
Yeah,
and I've sort of written that into the book, and I hope that people can get some sense of what it's like. And the greatest accolade I've ever had wasn't a review. I randomly got a letter. This would be about 2014, I think. I randomly got a letter from a retired vicar in France. And this guy said, I've just read your book about the Dunkirk campaign, in which I feature my own regiment, the 2nd Battalion of Coldstream Guards. And he said, I was an officer in the 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards at Dunkirk. And when I read it, it was exactly how I remembered it. He said, the way you described it was exactly how I remembered it. And I was taken aback because I didn't know who this guy was. I think he must have found me through regimental headquarters, perhaps, and got my address through them. And this letter just came out of the blue. And to have someone who was there saying, yeah, pretty much how it was, I thought, wow, well, I feel like I've done a great job, and I've done justice to the people who fought there to tell it how it was. So, yeah, I think by and large, I've been fairly successful with that.
Yeah, one of the things I kind of picked up from it was the level of swearing, and that in a positive way. So I think a lot of people's who haven't been in the military, their experience of anything like this comes from films. Yeah. And in the 50s and 60s, we would tend to have those jolly bad show. I think Carruthers has lost his leg, don't you know?
Yeah.
Oh damn! I shall get him some tea and biscuits.
Yeah.
And the for reasons of I would imagine certification to make sure a film can go to a wider audience. That a lot of that sort of thing and would be taken out, and then there was that big kind of the opening scene of Private Ryan where it is, as a lot of people say, as close as you can get to being shot at by Germans on a beach. So that really interested me. I noticed that, and I haven't been in combat, but I've been in emergency situations where things have got to be done and got to be done very quickly, or else people are going to get seriously injured. And I swear, I've seen video of me at an incident, and I can't believe how much I swear.
Yeah,
but it's getting that through to people, the stuff that he's doing, because it comes across in your book because people have personalities and they react in different ways to emergency situations, and you will have people who will literally grab the situation by the balls and get things moving. You'll have people who step back and maybe, I don't know what I'm doing here, and they need to be guided and pushed into, once they have a task, I find most people, you give them something to do, don't matter what's going on around them, they'll do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then the moving around thing, I found that really gripping. I don't know whether it's something that it's not, it's not a new technique or anything like that. It's something that's I've seen before in books. Tom Clancy springs to mind. You get invested in. You've got in Sea Lion Lodge, you've got your old guardsman who's come back and he's training the home guard, and you kind of get invested in his little story, and then it cuts, and it's like a cinematic, if you like, because you then go into the guys on Spurn Point or German paratroopers at Driffield. You kind of, and then you want to get back to you're one of the characters, but you're getting invested in it. So it's
Yeah.
a really great way of pushing people through the story. Did you write it that way, or did you write the chunks and then cut them up and put them together?
I kind of wrote it that way. I think some of it was by design, some of it was by accident. So I wanted to tell all these different perspectives. And I do get bored when I'm writing quite quickly, to be honest, you know. And so you find that there isn't often very many sections where there's endless dialogue and it goes on. You know, it tends to be quite short and sharp, and then we're on to the next scene. And part of that was me sort of just wanting to get on and write the action and not do all the boring backstory. So that there's almost a bit of intellectual laziness there, I suppose. So that was kind of accidental in many respects. But at the same time, I did want it to be quite punchy. I wanted it to have a really sort of shock effect when people read it. So it sort of smashed you in the face, and then you were moving on to the next smash in the face. And the effect that I didn't realise it would have was the page turning effect. And actually, lots of people have said to me, I can't put it down because I know it's just a short section. And I'll finish that, look at the watch and go, it's only another 3 pages, so I'll just read one more section. And then it's like, I'll just read another one. And before they know, it's like 2:00 in the morning. It's like, oh God, I'm at work in 4 hours, you know. So that was kind of unintentional, but has worked in my favour in the end. And so it's a technique that I've just kept using for all the other books.
We'll stick with the kind of a deep dive on the first book, if you don't mind, because that's the one I read while I was on holiday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm halfway through Bloody Meadow at the moment, so we'll come to that in a minute. But I think I've spoken about this with a number of my friends as well. It's a big hit, I think, in Yorkshire because of the locations involved. And, you know, places like Hudman Gap, which I can never say properly.
Meaning
And really familiar to me from working in North Yorkshire. Did you go and visit all those places and get these ideas in your head when you were there?
Yeah, so there's a real backstory to Salo Nord, actually. So our family holiday every year was Filey, weekend Filey in Caravan. So I sort of knew these things were there, but as a young kid, I never quite understood it because I only knew about D-Day. And I thought, well, these pillboxes should be in France. Why on the coast of Yorkshire? I didn't understand it. Clearly, as I grew up and learnt the history of the invasion scare of 1940, I realised what we were there for. Wind forward to my time as Regimental Sergeant Major, and we just got back from Afghanistan, and we theoretically had a clear period of about 18 months for just training and rest and recuperation, that kind of thing. And one of the things we wanted to do was a Commander's Week. And typically you go off and do tactical exercise with our troops on Salisbury Plain or somewhere like that. And I said to Commander at the time, he was very generous and gave me lots of freedom as Sergeant Major to do what I wanted with the commanders. And I said, you know, should we just go do something different? And I said, why don't we do this opposed amphibious landing and use Filey Bay, all those old pillboxes and defences are still there, use them as the real objectives and do the talk through on the beach. And then over the course of a week, we'll walk inland and follow an advance to contact type scenario. We had an assault river crossing in there, a massive forest clearance operation, and there was lots of variety of operations at war that we could have done. And the idea was that we'd walk it as well. You know, we'd start the beach and we'd literally walk inland towards York. So we'd all get plenty of exercise and fitness out of it, navigation involved, and would be constantly doing this cognitive exercise all the way through. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So I went and recce'd all this and planned it and had the whole plan ready to go. And then the battalion got warned off to go back to Afghanistan. So straight away, everything got thrown in the bin and we just went back onto operational training for redeployment. And then I left the army and I was left with this massive plan. I thought, well, that was for nothing. Then I thought, hold on, why don't I turn that into a book? Why don't I just, turn it into the Germans landing here and write a book about it? And like I say, I've been planning to write a book anyway, but I thought it might be a fantasy novel or something. And I thought, well, no, let's just turn it into an alternative history novel. And my first year after I left the army was spent watching my kids playing on one of these indoor play areas while I was sat there with the laptop at the table drinking endless coffee and typing up this novel. And that's where it came from, really.
Yeah. So did you did most of it come from your own imagination, or did you have to do a lot of research and, like the scenes where, Churchill and the British High Commander chatting about what's going on? Did you need to do a lot of research about various aspects of it?
I did, because I knew that the minute you start writing anything historical, there are people there, the button counters, ready to pick fault. And I knew I wouldn't get everything 100% correct. I knew that was impossible because I'm not a trained historian. But I wanted it to feel as real as possible. So, I went to the Cabinet War Rooms and spent a whole day there wandering round and round trying to get the atmosphere, making note of little things. So bits about Churchill's map board. He's actually got a map board down there, and they've listed that area of Yorkshire, and it's mapped out where they're going to sink the block ships and all the rest of it.
Oh, wow.
So all of that detail I've written into the book. That's real detail. It was part of the original plan. I got bequeathed by my granddad when he died, this massive Reader's Digest Atlas of the United Kingdom from 1967. And not only has it got all the old maps of the UK before all the motorways were built, it's got this most amazing section in it, maps of the UK with all kinds of different information on it, from crops in fields. And there's a page about the war, and it tells you all the different British formation locations by corps and division and where they were based in 1940, where all the ships were torpedoed on convoy duty. And it's just small detail like that I was able to pick out and put in the book. So that there's lots of stuff in there, which, is not well known, I think, in history books that I managed to find. Some of it I made up. I blatantly made up, and I made use of it to fit it. So I conveniently ignore the fact that most of Germany's destroyer force was sunk in the Norwegian campaign and pretend it wasn't, just so they could get across the North Sea, So there's lots of things that I make up. And I also had great fun because I put places in there that are very familiar and dear to me. So like my grandma's house is in the book. I won't tell you where, but it's in the book, and there's a big fight in and around my grandma's house, which just made me smile. So it was a labour of love in many respects, Lots of private jokes in there.
Yeah, lovely. Absolutely lovely story. Did you need to, obviously, being involved in the infantry all your career, I would imagine that the combat scenes with the infantry was easier to write than, let's say, the naval scenes and the aircraft scenes. Did you need to go and kind of read memoirs and stuff to get a feel for fighting on ships, for example?
Yeah, I did. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've got no doubt that an ex-Matlow or an ex-Air Force person will be reading those books and going, "Well, what's he on about? That's not the right term or the right language." I'm pretty confident that's the case. But I did my best, not being a sailor or an airman. And this is where the old great 1950s black and white films come in. If you look at all those films like the Battle of the River Plate and Sink the Bismarck, there's some wonderful detail on there. And of course, many of the actors on those films had done those jobs for real. And so, they're acting, but actually they're doing stuff which they'd done for real, and were using very familiar terminology and stuff. So I kind of used that as my guide to try and make it feel as authentic as possible. And I tried not to get into too much technical detail when it came to ships and aeroplanes, because I just didn't have that knowledge. So I did it as much as I could do to make it feel real without sort of digging myself in a hole, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It was lovely to see HMS Hood sleeping around. I really enjoyed that. It's remembered for the wrong reasons, that ship. It was a beautiful, beautiful ship.
Yeah.
So did you then move on to because you've got 4 books, and I do apologise, I've not written down what the series are called. They call it the books 1, 2, 3, and 4 from, is it Finest Hour?
The Finest Hour is the sort of unofficial name that I use for them, yeah.
Yeah. So did you move on to those books next, or where? Because you've also got another book on the Wars of the Roses, and I think is it Vikings or the other one?
It's a fantasy novel, which is
Fantasy
a
novel.
kind of mashup of Western sort of Dark Age mythology type stuff. Yeah.
So did you move on to the other war books next, or the other World War II books, or did you move and change?
So I moved on to World War II. I only ever planned to write one book, and I brought that first one out, and I was terrified about how it was going to be received. And I thought, well, do you know what? If people say it's rubbish, I'll just unpublish it and pretend it never happened, and and that'll be the end of it.
Yes.
And apart from that one troll that I had, who disappeared pretty quickly, I was really taken aback by how much love there was for the book. Really surprised. And it was the War Games community that got it out there, because I had no contacts, I had no previous sort of reputation. And I put an advert in War Games Illustrated. And about 2 weeks after that went out in the magazine, the sales just spiked up through the roof.
Wow.
And then people started writing the first reviews about it, which were on the whole pretty positive. And then I think someone used it as a reference for an article in War Games Illustrated about a game that they were doing.
Yeah.
And it just sort of took off from there. And it sold really well, and people said really nice things. And I thought, wow, actually, maybe I can write. And I was already conscious that there were some flaws with it, because it was my first book, and I rushed to get it out. And, I should have taken my time with it a bit more. But despite that, it was still proving really popular and going down well with the audience. And even more surprisingly, people were saying, when's the next one coming out? I thought, I hadn't really thought about another one. But at that point, I'd just done this tour to Dunkirk with these kids and the veterans. And so, with all that knowledge and sort of knowledge of the ground fresh in my mind, I thought, well, I've always been interested in that period. And from a regimental point of view, we've got very deep history of that campaign. I thought, let's do a Dunkirk one. So that's where Thunder in May came from. And once again, it came out. And by now, I'd got a bit of an audience who were looking for the next book. So I didn't really have to promote it that much when it came out. And again, that was really well received. So I thought, well, I'll just keep on going until someone stopped doing it.
Yeah.
So then there was another one about D-Day, Crucible of Fate, focused on Sword Beach. And that in a way was done because I had this idea in my mind that everyone was just speaking about Omaha, following Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers. People thought D-Day was just an American show, and I thought, actually people need to know about the British part of this. So I wrote about Sword Beach. And again, I've got a distant relative who was killed on Sword Beach with the East Yorkshire Regiment. So it was a bit of a tribute to him. So I did those three. I then had a bit of a break because life was busy at work. And then I needed to get back into writing. And I actually had I found a story that I wrote in Northern Ireland way back in 1991.
Oh, yeah.
I was fogged in on an observation on a mountain for weeks. And I was just sat there bored stiff, couldn't see anything apart from fog and the occasional mountain top sticking up and the occasional stone circle and stuff like that. And I'd written this story in pencil in an old army notebook, which I found.
Wow.
Sort of like 25 years later, and I thought, I should do something with that. So I sort of pulled it out, typed it up, played around with it a bit, and brought it out. And it's not as popular as the World War II novels, but it's got its audience. And it seems to have done all right. It still sells, and that's okay. And again, it was an excuse basically to have people killing each other.
Yeah.
And then the pressure. I say the pressure, the desire from my readership, what my readership is, was very much for more World War II. So the Burma novel came along next. And that actually I found really difficult to write because it wasn't an area that I knew a great deal about. But I felt that it should be written about, having read Defeat to Victory, I thought this story needs to be better known. What these guys went through. This was a horrendous campaign. And at the time, there wasn't a lot out there about it. In recent years, in the last decade, there's been a lot more written about it than there has previously. So actually doing the research for that was really difficult, but I managed to get a couple of key texts which had all the detail I needed, and off I went writing. But that took me about 3.5, 4 years to write. The others only took me about 6 months each, but that one took a long time. But I was determined to get it finished and out there. And again, that's been really well received as well. And I'm very, very humbled by what people have said about it. And then the Taunton book, the Bloody Meadow, that was something which was just so easy to write, because I grew up near Taunton. My grandparents lived on the edge of the battlefield, so I knew the battlefield intimately. I'd always been fascinated by it, always wanted to write about it. Didn't want to make it too long a book. I didn't want to get into all of the historiography of which king was descended from whom and which family was related to who, because that is really complex, and there are people who could do that far better than me. I just wanted to write the violent bit. And so it is literally a 24-hour snapshot, the night before to the night after the battle, and there's just fighting from the word go. I think, if I remember rightly, the first sentence is something like, "It was a shitty day." I think that's how the book starts, if I remember rightly. And that's it. I just want to get straight into it.
Don't tell me what happens. I'm only halfway through.
Okay.
Don't tell me who wins.
Don't tell me who wins.
So going back to that first one, then, how did you go about getting it published? Did you do it yourself, or did you get somebody else?
I did in the end. I started off doing what you're supposed to do. I got a copy of the Writer's Handbook, which comes out every year, which lists every agent and publisher in the country, along with the genres that they publish. And I wrote off to them and sent sample manuscripts and all the rest of it. And there's this rule in the publishing industry that you can't attack them all at the same time. You have to do one at a time, allow them to reject it, and then you go on to the next person.
The next one,
And so, that's why J.K. Rowling took so long to get Harry Potter off of me. And I tried this and, got a number of rejection letters, some of which were kinder than others. And I'm a notoriously impatient man. And after a while, I just thought, bollocks to this. I've done this. I just want to see a copy of it on my shelf, and I just want someone to read it, even if they say it's not very good. I just want to do it, get it out of the way. So I found a self-publishing company through a friend, because at the time I didn't realise you could pretty much self-publish for free and organise it all yourself. So I paid someone to do it for me, which was, very vain thing to do. But I thought, well, I'll let the readership decide, that they can decide whether it's worth being out there or not. And I got them to put it all together and get it out there. And I thought, I'll wait and see what happens. And like I say, I was utterly taken aback at the response. It wasn't the response I was expecting. I really did think there'd be a few shite reviews, and then I'd say, just take that off your system now, and that'll be the end of it. But it was worth having a go. And in the end, I was looking at my bank account and thinking, well, that's all right. I'm making some money out of this, and people are saying some nice things. And then, a couple of books in, I realised that everything that the publishing company was doing for me, I could do for myself anyway, and retain full control. So I stopped using them and started doing it myself. And now I've got the best of both worlds, because I've got friends actually who've been properly published through very well-known publishers. They get less royalties than I do. They have less control over what goes in the book. They get told what's got to be cut and edited out, and you need to put more of this in it. And I've got complete freedom. I can do it my way, and it can be absolutely my product. And I've got no middleman. I take all the reward. So that's pretty much how I did it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think they've got a book in them, don't they? And some go as far as writing, but that's the next step, isn't it? To actually get it out there and get people reading it, and get feet, and then to carry on and do it. Is that absolutely cracking job. So, do you plan more books? Have you got a book on the go at the moment?
Yeah, my problem is that I've got more ideas than time to write. So I feel really guilty every time I come to Partisan. There's a gentleman that comes to see me, and he's looking for a sequel to the fantasy story. which is called "And Kingdom Shall Fall." He wants to follow up to that, and I've sort of got that book in my mind, sort of half written. I know what the story is, but the problem is that there's so much demand for the World War II stuff, and so I have got another World War II book which I've started writing, slightly different theatre of war, and you know, those books, they take a lot of writing because you've got to do the research and getting it down on paper. You know, it's time consuming. So I've got at least those 2 books, but then I've been asked by other people, you know, that people come up to me saying, oh, you know, I'd really like you to write about the English Civil War or write about this. And it's because not everyone likes my writing style, but the people that do, they can imagine the other battles I could write about. And so they're really keen for me to write these other periods, and I'd love to do them all. You know, if I could ever sell enough to make it a full-time job, that would be great. But you know, sadly, I think the thing that people don't realise about writers is that unless you're J.K. Rowling, most writers have second jobs, proper jobs. You know,
bit like podcasters.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered, because your World War II books are, you know, your different theatres each time, different characters. Have you ever thought about, you know, a Sharp or a main character that runs through a series of books?
Well, what you'll find if you read any more of the World War II books is the characters do reappear.
Right.
So the main character in Zalo and Nord, the big sort of gruff guardsman, he does appear elsewhere in other books.
Excellent, right.
Also, some of the German characters in that book reappear as well. There's a British officer in there as well who's like he's a kind of a villain, a bit of a comical villain, but he kind of reappears in several other books as well. You'll see him again elsewhere. They don't all share the same narrative, if you know what I mean. They all go off and have their own different adventures during the war, but then they interlink and reappear. And that amuses me. That there's also in there are 2 characters who were the only 2 characters based on real. Well, there's historical figures in there that people will clearly recognise, but there are 2 characters in there who are theoretically fictional, but they happen to be my 2 best mates who I was in the army with. And they're a kind of Morecambe and Wise type duo. You know, one's a straight, one's the clown, and they bounce off each other all the time in real life. And I write them into the book as a kind of personal in-joke, and they know who they are in the book. And they always make them do really stupid things in the books. They're always doing something, you know, silly. And it amuses me. I laugh when I'm writing it in because it's a private joke between the 3 of us, and it makes them feel good because they're in a book, you know.
Brilliant.
So there are lots of private jokes in those books, lots of private moments that just make me smile when I'm writing them. And it helps break up the process of what is a lengthy exercise, you know.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that then. Because I shall definitely crack on after I've finished Bloody Meadow. I'm enjoying that very much. Don't tell me what happens. So to pick up those characters again in the other stories will be really good to look forward to. If you did have that blank sheet, blank check, do you think it would be English Civil War that you would write about, or what would be your kind of that?
Yeah, I'd love to write. I'd love to write a full suite of books like the Sharp books, but for the English Civil War. And again, with a really heavy regimental bias, I'd like to sort of, you know, go through there and finish with the formation of the regiment in 1650, you know, and then the restoration as we became the Royal Guards. That would be a nice way to sort of finish off the series. But I'd love to do that. All those battlefields, especially the ones that are nearby, you know, from where I grew up, Marston Moor and the storming of Selby and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'd love to do that. But I mean, there are some writers out there. There's a chap. Is he called Turnbull? I think is the surname, maybe, who's got a series of books, and that guy is really knowledgeable about the English Civil War, and you can see it in his Twitter posts. He's invested a lot of time in this, and I do worry that it'd be like trying to jump on his back. It's a bit like someone trying to write a series of Napoleonic novels in the wake of Sharp. You know, it's a hard act to follow, and people would say, "Oh, you just sort of like jumping on the coattails." Yeah. And I don't want to be seen as doing that. I think my worry when I wrote the World War II novels is that I didn't want to be seen as trying to sort of copy Sven Hassel or Leo Kessler or anyone like that.
Yeah.
I wanted it to have my own feel to it. So yeah, I mean, the jury's out. I've got so many ideas in my mind. The problem is finding some kind of order of priority to get it all down on paper.
Yeah, and one day when you retire, you'll be able to concentrate.
Sit and scroll away.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying when we're painting. We've got a few minutes left, so I'd just like to, if we could, cover a couple of things. So you have a stand at Partisan, don't you?
That's right, yeah.
How did that come about? It's a little bit of a writer's corner with you and is it Harry Sidebottom?
Harry Sidebottom, yeah.
Yeah. You're kind of there every year and you're chatting away to people.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky there. Richard and Lawrence and the guys that run Partisan were very kind to have me there. When the books first came out, well, I should point out that Partisan I sort of see as my home show. Even though I'm from York and you've got That and Attack up there. Partisan is the first war game show I ever went to. I just learnt to drive and I suddenly had this freedom when I could drive myself to a war game show, and the first one that I saw was Partisan in the old Kelham Hall location. I went there, bought a pile of English Civil War figures. I mean, I was a kid in a sweet shop, a proper war game show. And so I've always had a bit of an affinity for the show. And when I published the first book, like I say, no one knew me. I thought, how do you promote a book? And I thought, well, surely wargamers would be interested. This is their area. So I put the advert in the magazine. And I wrote to 2 war game shows. One doesn't exist anymore. I think it was called Derby World War Games. Used to be at the University of Derby. I wrote to them and I wrote to Richard and the team at Partisan and said, could I have a table and just come along? And I kind of sort of gave them the hard sell because I didn't know if they'd want me. I think they'd think this isn't toy soldiers. But I said, it's about the war, it's military and blah, blah, blah. And actually, they both said yes. And the guys at Derby were great. They were very kind to have me there as well. But Richard and Lawrence in particular were really welcoming. They were really behind it and said, "Oh, this would be a great asset to the show. This is something a bit different." And they invited me down, and I had a great time. People were really interested and really supportive, and more importantly, bought lots of copies of the book. And ever since then, they always send me an invite and say, do you want a table this year? And unless I'm, stuck and I've got something on, I always go along, even if I've not got anything new out. It's just great to see the same old faces now because I know so many people there. Plus, I get the chance to wander around and, do a bit of war gaming and buy some stuff. But it's great for reader feedback. It's just it's great publicity, even if you don't sell many copies on the day. But whenever there's a new book out, we always take plenty of copies and they always sell well. So I've got a very loyal audience there, which I appreciate massively. I really do. The war games community has been so tremendously kind to me, and they are the best salesmen because they go away and tell their friends and spread word and even war games some of the scenarios, which is really humbling to think.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's generated scenarios. So I have to really put my hand on my heart and say a massive thank you to Richard and Lawrence at Partisan. They've been absolute stalwart supporters all the way through, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic show. I always come and have a chat with you when I can get a word in edgeways. And there's always a lady with you. Is that your wife?
Yeah, that's my wife / business manager who she's decided she's my business manager and tries to tell me how I should be marketing my books and what I should be doing and this, that and the other. And yeah, she's very loyal as well. She traipses around the country following me and helps me out. And if no one does want to talk to me, I don't feel like a spare plank stood there on my own. So.
I think last time I came up to her and you weren't there and I was chatting with her for a while. I said, just tell Andy that Ken's been, he'll know who it is.
Yeah, she mentioned,
so it was very good. And then just to finish off quickly, you've done a bit of some YouTube videos as well on a Brave Men Died Here channel. And it's kind of a personal battlefield guide, isn't it, that you've done with, I think it's 12 battles I think you've done.
Yeah, it was never really a plan.
Yeah. Is it something you've done professionally, battlefield guiding, or is it just
no,
an interest?
not at all, really. I went over to Normandy with my son. I'd been before, and I went over with my son, and the wife said, "Oh, take your camera and film it, and sort of look at the videos when you come back." So I got there, and I was like, "Oh, I don't really know what to do." So I just sort of like cuffed it. I just gave the camera to him and said, "I just film it, and I'll walk over the beach and just talk to the camera." Completely unscripted, completely unplanned. Certainly the Omaha beach video, if you ever watch it, there's loads of background noise because it was a really windy day. I'd no microphone or anything. So it was a real amateur effort, and it was really just done for a bit of a laugh. And I think I did Omaha Beach, Sword Beach. I think we did Pegasus Bridge, and then Strong Point Hillman. I think there were 4 that we did when we were there. And they were all literally off the top of my head. I hadn't researched any of the detail. I was just pulling stuff out of the memory bank and hoping I got it about right. Stuck them on YouTube when I got back, just for somewhere to put them, not really planning to make it a channel. And God, the Omaha Beach video just went through the roof. The Americans loved it, absolutely loved it. And I forget how many it's had now. I think it's over 1 million, probably more than that. It was just going crazy, and I was getting hundreds and hundreds of comments. And I thought, wow, people are actually watching this stuff. And then, as you'll know this, YouTube starts contacting you saying, "Do you want to monetize your channel?" All that stuff. I thought, well, I'll have a go. I have to say, monetizing a YouTube channel was the most painful experience of my entire life. And just forms for forms and emails and things you've got to tick and do. Anyway, finally got it monetized, and I thought, well, I'd put some more videos up there. Got a little bit more professional, not much, but I started planning what I was going to say a bit more, and I realised that a lot of people who are into history, they live in America, and the only battlefields they can get to really are American battlefields. They hear about all these great campaigns of history, but they're at the other side of the world. They can never see the ground. So I thought, well, we'll walk the ground and just try and help people understand what the battlefield looks like and what we think happened in various parts of it. And that's really where it came from. And I did that. I think we got some English Civil War and some medieval battlefields on there. And then work got really busy. And the dreaded YouTube comment came saying, "You haven't posted anything for however many days. We're demonetizing you." Yeah. I really can't be arsed, come on, give me a break. So I might make some more and put them up there, but I can't be bothered with monetizing it again. And it was never about the money. And you don't make millions anyway, do you? It's a few quid. So it was really just, a bit of a hobby when I was doing it. But I really enjoyed doing the Taunton one because, again, it's personal to me because I grew up there. So it was nice to walk around the battlefield and show that in a lot more detail. But then there's lots of lesser known battlefields that people have never heard of. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about living in the UK is that we're surrounded by these things. They're everywhere. You drive through them and walk through them on a daily basis without even knowing that you're on the scene of a, historically significant event. So just the road from where I am now is Hopton Heath, literally a mile away from where I live. But there's not much there. There's a sign. If you keep your eyes open, you see a small sign saying it's there. But then you just drive through it, and that's it. It's just a farmer's field, Yeah,
I've got at Walton Moor, the English Civil War battlefield on my doorstep, and I'd lived here for 15 years before I realised it was there. And there are little kind of overgrown markers that tell you bits about the battle, but it's amazing how much history we have that we forget because that is literally on our doorstep. And Marston Moor, the memorial, that's one of my putty stops. I'll pull up there and get my sandwich box out and a drink.
Yeah, perfect.
So I've watched your video while I've been sat in there by that perfect for me with my lunch. So I just wanted to mention that because they are very good, and the Taunton one I enjoy particularly. Again, that's in my area of business, so it's one that I visit on a regular basis. So it was useful to get your perspective on the lie of the land. But obviously, don't tell me who wins because I'm reading the book.
No spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers.
Yeah.
So it's been lovely talking to you this afternoon, Andy. I've really enjoyed
Likewise.
myself. And I always end the show with getting the guest to ask me a question if they've got one. If you haven't, I will escape question free, but the offer is there if you have one.
Yeah, I suppose my question is the question that I ask to most people of your ilk, which is how do you just paint so quickly and sustain the rate of painting? I mean, there was the great quote on one of your podcasts a couple of years back, which I loved, which was just fucking paint it.
Stop thinking about painting.
Yeah, I always remember that, and when I'm having one of those days and I'm struggling to get motivated, I think, oh, just remember to paint it, and I get on. But yeah, I mean, the size of the units that you field and stuff, for me, that would probably take a few years to put together. So how you generate them at that speed, and I know you've got a busy job anyway. I just wonder how you organise your life to do that.
Yeah, I think I work shifts, so I have a benefit of being in the house when other people are asleep.
Okay.
And nobody bugs me. Nobody's going take the bins out.
Yeah.
It's just empty, and I'm just painting. So that's one benefit. Another one is that I used to be a commission painter, so I used to paint for money.
Right, yeah.
That built speed up. And the other thing is, and this is where this kind of stop fucking about thing started, is that I don't mess about with new techniques. I have techniques that work. So, contrast paints come out. I'm not interested because it would mean changing my undercoating method and the way that I paint and the process that I have. So I don't change that. I'll occasionally introduce a new paint or something along those lines. And batch painting is the other big one. I'll paint a base at a time. So 8 figures at a time, put them on the base, put them in the box next day, and you can see the unit building.
Yeah, see the building.
Rather than having 96 half-painted figures, you've got 48 unpainted figures and 48 painted figures that you're going, nearly there, another 8.
Now that makes a lot of sense psychologically, yeah.
It's mostly around that because they stop fucking about and just paint it. It's developed into 2 different strains because it actually started from somebody asking me a similar question you're asking me now, and I just kind of said, right, well, what do you do now? And they were going through all these different preparation processes and all these different types of paints and mediums they would set up, and getting around doing this and doing it. And I said, right, well, how long have you spent so far? 20 minutes. I said, right, have you painted anything? No.
Yeah.
Right, stop fucking about and paint it.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Whereas it's now, it's kind of grown into another thing where people have used it as that stop procrastinating and get on and painting it. And I'm more than happy that it's taken another life on. But it did make me laugh how that caught on.
Yes, some of the best advice is the short, succinct advice, that contains an essential truth, and that does.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think it's the Yorkshire, living in Yorkshire for as long as I have. I think it's all it comes out in that.
Yeah, saying it as it is. Yeah,
exactly. So thanks again, Andy. It's been much appreciated. And just say good night to everyone.
Yeah, good night, everyone, and thanks for listening.
Lovely. And not just saying this because Andy's here, but I do very much enjoy his books, and grab hold of a copy and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Until next time, see you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Andy. I certainly did. It was great fun, and we covered quite a lot in, coming up to 3 hours now, aren't we? So I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to have a chat with us, we will both be at the Partisan Show, which will be next weekend if you're listening to this on the day of release. If you're a couple of weeks late after the release of the podcast, you've missed it. But there we go. I tried. So if you do go and have a chat with Andy, mention the podcast, and hopefully how much you enjoyed it, and I'm sure he'd be grateful if you pick a book up while you are at his stand. I shall have my Italian Wars game there, so come over and say hello and have a look at the pipe blocks that Andy spoke so kindly about during the course of the interview. So that leaves it for this week, and I hope to be back in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And my next guest should be Lorenzo Sartori, and Lorenzo is the editor of the Italian War Games magazine, and it's called, and bless my Yorkshire pronunciation, Dadi a Pombi, I think is, which is Dyson led, I think. So anyway, Lorenzo will tell me how wrong I am with my pronunciation. But any excuse for me to combine my two favourite things, that is wargaming and Italy in one show. So I hope to have a chat with Lorenzo about his magazine, about wargaming in general in Italy, and how things are over there. So hopefully I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. In the meantime, if I don't see you at Partisan, enjoy your hobby and your painting, whatever you're doing now, and I'll see you soon. Until then, see you.